Remember, in 2014, at least we think they do. We'll see. Results coming in later tonight. James Hoffa with us tonight. Jennifer Epps Addison, thanks so much. My assignment on our coverage tonight is here in Florida. I'll be over at the Charlie Crist camp reporting here on MSNBC. That's the Ed Show. I'm Ed Schultz. MSNBC's election coverage starts right now.
Hydration needs accordingly, because this is going to be a long night with lots of suspense. 36 U.S. Senate seats are up tonight. About a dozen of them are in who knows territory right now. Control of the United States Senate is a coin flip at this point. About 24 House seats are anybody's guess, even though Republicans will hold control of that body. In the governor's races, more incumbents might lose their seats tonight than at any time in decades. There are more than a dozen governor's races where nobody knows what's going to happen tonight. This is going to be a very fun night to watch.
Thank you. And it's a very divided country, obviously. And I think there's a yearning in the country out there for some kind of control over things. The world is drifting, with terrorists growing in horror, with disease threatening from Africa to some extent, with politicians unable, unwilling, unready to do what actually their occupation requires them to do, to get things under control. Fix the immigration system, invest in building the country, creating real strength in the economy. Strength that opens factories, but also hope for the young kid coming out of school. And tonight, I'll be listening for the candidates, losers as well as winners, who talk about this stuff.
Tonight, the difference between what the country thinks about this Congress, how low the esteem of Congress is in the eyes of the country, versus how many hundreds of millions, nay, billions of dollars have been spent to address our options and our choices tonight in terms of how people are going to go vote tonight. That difference between what the public thinks and what has been spent to influence the public's opinion tonight, I think makes for a chaotic vista. I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Well, the good thing about chaos is drama. Yeah. And the good thing about drama is there's personality in it. And I think tonight you're going to see some unusual people with audacity are going to come to the national stage tonight. And you're going to meet them for the first time. And some of them are going to be interesting to watch for years to come. I always like the guy or the woman who beats the spread, who beats the national wave, as we call it, who comes out, who survives the wave. You're going to see Jerry Brown, probably, in his 4th term as governor tonight. You're going to see people that have been around, people that you never thought would be big success. On the other side, John Kasich, people that you never thought would be big stars. It's going to be interesting tonight. Watch the person who beats the wave, who stands up against all the wind and wins nonetheless. That's the person I think you're going to see who's worth listening to in the years ahead.
I think that's right. And I think as opposed to the 2010 midterms, when so many of the surprise races were surprises because one of the two people in the contest collapsed, there's very few of those tonight. People who are going to be winning are mostly going to be winning on their own terms. But in terms of the drama tonight and in terms of what to watch for, our own Steve Kornacki is at the Magic Election Board. He's going to be giving us some guidance tonight as to what we ought to be watching for, particularly early on. What's up, Steve?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we should say, going to be potentially a very long night when a really competitive race in Alaska we're talking about here, could be hours from now before this thing really gets settled. But I want to give you 3 states early on to keep a close eye on that I think are going to set the tone potentially for what's to come throughout the night, so that maybe by the time we get to Alaska, we have a better sense of where things are going. So let's start at 7:30 tonight. About an hour and a half from now, the polls are going to close in North Carolina. And this is the first of 2 early must-win states for Democrats. For Democrats to retain their Senate majority, Kay Hagan, the Democratic incumbent in North Carolina, really has to beat Tom Tillis, the Republican challenger. The good news for Democrats is that Kay Hagan has enjoyed a slight lead in the polls throughout this campaign. What Republicans are banking on here is the idea that there's this national wave today that's going to lift all Republican candidates like Tom Tillis. Those few critical points put him over the top. So here's a test of whether that's happening. One thing to keep in mind when the polls close, a lot of the sort of Democratic early vote, you can expect that to be counted earlier. The expectation here is that Hagan will be doing very well in the early returns. Let's see if that sustains itself. Let's look at the second must-win state early for Democrats. Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent in New Hampshire, trying to hold off Scott Brown. Again, if the Democrats fail to hold this seat, that sets a very dire tone for them for the rest of the night. But if Jeanne Shaheen is able to hold on here, that is an encouraging sign for Democrats. And on the flip side, the early closing in Kentucky, a 2 2-time zone state here. So polls going to start closing there actually at 6 o'clock, and then 7 o'clock we'll get the numbers. Mitch McConnell, the top Republican in the Senate, trying to hold off Allison Grimes. There's been bad signs lately about where this race is heading in terms of the polls for Grimes. The question when the numbers start to come in, is she exceeding expectations? Is she making this closer than those polls look? Are the Democrats overperforming here, or are the Republicans getting what they increasingly were coming to expect as this campaign wound down, a big win out of Kentucky? So a test there for Republicans early on as well.
Steve Kornacki, thank you. We're going to have reporters on scene in a lot of these key races tonight, including some of those ones that you were just talking about. We're going to start tonight with Lawrence O'Donnell. He's at Greg Orman headquarters in Overland Park, Kansas. Lawrence, can you give us the stage a little bit about what has been happening at this unexpected race in Kansas and what you're expecting tonight?
Well, Rachel, this is the race that a screenwriter would normally have to dream up. You would not expect to see it in real life. And this is an extraordinary situation where, as Steve can point out, there are several different states where it just might come down to that state for control of the United States Senate if it comes down to Kansas. The suspense may not be over tonight because Greg Orman, who's running as an independent against Republican incumbent Pat Roberts, has refused to declare which side he would vote for leadership of the Senate, the Republican or the Democratic side. There is a scenario in which the control of the Senate could all come down to Senator-elect Orman's choice. He's refused to say how he would vote in that situation. It's created an incredible drama here. Kansas Senate races are not suspenseful events. Republicans have won every one of them for the last 80 years. We have the local media here marveling at having national media here for a Kansas Senate race, but it is all about the mysterious independent on the one question he refused to answer throughout the campaign, which is how would he vote for majority leader of the Senate. We also have an amazing governor's race here. Sam Brownback, ultra-conservative Republican, in serious trouble in Kansas. He created the biggest tax cut, income tax cut in Kansas history. It has hurt funding for schools, and the Democrat has a real shot now at the governorship here tonight also. Chris, Rachel.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence O'Donnell. NBC senior political reporter Perry Bacon is in Mitch McConnell headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky. So, Perry, what does it smell like in that headquarters? Are they upbeat, downbeat, or worried?
You know, this race was close until about 3 weeks ago, but now a lot of confidence in the McConnell camp. A lot of his former staffers, he has a long history of staffers, and a lot of them have come down to Kentucky today because they think this is going to be a big night where not only is he going to win, but he's going to eventually be majority leader. So they want to be here with him to celebrate. On the other hand, we spent some time talking to Democrats today, and I found Democrats privately talking about not if Ms. Grimes would lose, but talking about would she lose by 4 or 5, or would it be worse than this? So a lot of confidence here. This race, the Democrats and the Republicans broadly agree, this race, hard to see McConnell losing tonight.
Well, just to mess up the storyline a little bit,
Chris.
why did the guy drop $2 million of his own money into the race at the last 11th hour if he had this kind of lead developing?
He's nervous, and they've spent a lot of money. McConnell is running like a nervous person still throughout this race. He's done so. The final totals, Chris, I think will show that he spent 2 times as much as Grimes did, and you can tell on the ground here because people are, like, when I talk to them, repeating things that are in McConnell's ads basically word for word, because this is a very small state of 4 million people, and when you spend the amount of money McConnell has here, you've got a great saturation. I think that's what is driving this race. The money is really driven it here.
Okay, thank you very much, Perry Bacon, who's at McConnell headquarters. We'll be back to you. And now to the hard-fought race in the open Senate seat in Georgia. Joy Reid is at the headquarters for the Democratic candidate, Michelle Nunn. We're going to be watching this race for a while, aren't we? This is not going to be over tonight. Joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris and Rachel, this is one of those races that by all rights Democrats really shouldn't have a shot in. This is a very red state, and even with massive minority turnout, President Obama was not able to pull it off in 2012 or 2008. But here's the thing. Democrats hope they can change the makeup of this electorate to bring out more African-American voters, even without the president at the top of the ticket. And they're doing that by walking this fine line between what the Republicans in the state want to talk about, which is Michelle Nunn and what they say would be her ties to President Obama, and what they need to get those African-American voters out, namely a decent respect for President Obama. So we talked to Allison Lonergan Grimes, who went out on the campaign trail with her earlier today. This is what she said said about that very question of Barack Obama.
Warren had said you'd just be a rubber stamp for the president. How do you answer that?
You know, I say, let me tell you about the things where I'm different from the president. I wish that he'd move forward with Keystone. I wish that he would reverse the cuts to our military, which I think are really significantly damaging our military readiness. But I will work together when it comes to the minimum wage or pay equity or bipartisan legislation around immigration reform. Again, I'm going to focus on what's best for Georgia, and I'm going to be respectful of my colleagues in the Congress, and I'll certainly be respectful of the president as well.
And notice that Michelle Nunn has walked that fine line probably better than most candidates that are running in this cycle. She has definitely pivoted back to the issues that are important to her constituency, minimum wage being a big one, and she's kept it very, very close. So this is definitely one to watch. It didn't make Steve's big board, but this is definitely going to be a race to watch. Polls close in less than an hour.
Joy Reid, thank you very much, Joy. That's fascinating. And seeing Michelle Nunn on camera there trying to thread that Democratic needle this year, where Democrats are not necessarily trying to insult the president unnecessarily, but they are running, if not against him, then at least away from him. I want to bring into discussion now MSNBC's Reverend Al Sharpton, as well as Andrea Mitchell and Chuck Todd from NBC News. Welcome, you guys. Thanks for being here, all of you.
Thank you.
Looking at Michelle Nunn there in Georgia and thinking about this tough race, Al, I'll start with you. In terms of what they've been able to do in these individual tough races, what's been the difference between a state like Georgia, where it seems like the ground game is the story, the organizing is the story, the Democratic effort is the story, and a state like Kentucky, where all they're talking about is national prevailing winds? It seems like there's nothing state-specific that's making a difference in some of these states, but some of them it is.
And some of the states have individual concerns, different, like, for example, Georgia, I toured, they're concerned in Clayton County with a transit referendum. In Kentucky, there are other concerns. In Missouri, it's about teachers' tenure. So there are different groups that are bringing out different constituencies, and I think all of these races will be determined by turnout. When you deal with the distancing of President Obama, you've got to thread that needle where not only you don't insult the president, but you don't turn off your African-American voter turnout, which will be critical in races like Georgia. So it's a real hard needle to thread, and I think we're going to see tonight who threads it and who ends up with just the pen in their hand with an empty needle top.
Let me go back to you want to go in here, but I think this is impossible. I don't know how you can appeal to Obama supporters by snubbing him. And when a candidate with a lot of publicity around her, Allison Lonergan Grimes, with a lot of political background, she's no amateur, she grew up with this, would refuse to say she voted for the President of the United States, the leader of her party, I think tomorrow morning when we put a signature on this election, it's going to be that denial. Denial twice, at least. She probably continue to do it tonight. What is this about the Democrats where they can't stick together?
Well, what I would say is that Michelle Nunn showed in that interview with Joy Reid that she could thread the needle by saying, I'm with him on minimum wage and other economic issues, and I'm not with him on others. I'm independent. I'm for the people of Georgia. That is a much more artful, politically artful way of handling it than what Allison Grimes did. I agree with you. I think that what Allison Grimes did in refusing to say whether she had voted for Barack Obama really ended up, if it does turn out that way in Kentucky, ended up being the turning point of that campaign.
Here's what I don't understand, though. Are Democrats just myopic when it comes to managing the downside of things? Right, so Democrats are saying, like, maybe if I don't talk about President Obama being president and being a Democrat, he won't be president and he won't be a Democrat. That will no longer be a factor in my race. That's going to be true no matter what they say.
But here's the thing. It didn't work for Republicans in 06.
Running away from
it
Bush,
didn't work for Democrats in 94. It just, it's one of those things you sit there and you say, there's always one person it works for. And so then all these consultants gravitate, look, it worked over here. Yeah. It didn't work for 34 other people. So I don't get it either, because I think what you do is, so one side says President Obama's the problem with the economy, the problem with the gridlock. The other side says, well, you know what? President Obama is a problem. You're right. Well, what does everybody hear? President Obama's a problem. So here you had number one and number two issues are what? The economy and gridlock. We found that over and over again. Republicans handed the people that didn't like the gridlock President Obama. And Democrats said, well, we're going to go after this niche voting group. We're going to have to get this niche voting group. We're going to have to get this niche voting group. And where was the message?
And
right? Where was the cohesive? Where was the cohesive?
Can I ask a question of Andrea? We talk all the time. ISIS exists. There's a part of the world right now that's growing and perhaps into a caliphate of people that are really anti-Western, anti-Israel, but anti-us. They grab our people and they behead them on television. How did that cease to be an election issue? Because somehow, did we change the channel? Did Ebola with 2 victims seem more important to us? I mean, how does that happen?
I think it did stay an election issue. I mean, we saw all these closing argument ads. The world's a terrifying place. Be afraid.
I sense it's more.
It was not a substantive argument. It was a scare tactic by the Republican opponents of Democratic incumbents who tried to focus on ISIS and Ebola in the scariest, most non-factual ways to take the eye off.
Where's the debate about
ISIS? Real issues, which were the economy. But the Democrats were dumb enough to not say, let's talk about the economy.
Right.
Let's talk about
not only that, they didn't even have, but they didn't engage in the conversation. You know, Republicans had a strategy here for 18 months. They're going to nationalize this election. They thought it was going to be health care. You know, the issue kept changing. But they had a strategy. They're going to nationalize this election. They're going to do it. They see that they've got a map that's their direction. They're going to nationalize it. This is about getting Republicans out. So they found ways to do it. And they kept, the issue is immigration this week, fine. We're going to make that a national issue. If it's ISIS, fine. If it's Ebola, fine. And then the Democrats, again, just got caught up in their, I think, this is not a case where the sum is greater than the parts, and they only focused on the parts.
They tried to make every election a local election, every election a state-specific election,
and it worked in one place. Now, she may not win. It worked in one place, North Carolina, because you had something that the opponent was a part of. Right.
Tom Tillis represents the legislature.
So Raleigh Republicans versus Washington Democrats. So she created a choice election environment. You can't say that in many other cases.
But they could have. They could have taken some of the national arguments. For example, when you talk about the economy, rather than accept their premise, they could have come back with a different premise saying, yes, this president inherited 800,000 jobs, he added jobs every month. And if we had gotten more public sector jobs that you voted against or your party voted against, it would have even been more enormous. But when you accept their premise, you lose your conclusion. And that, I think, is the biggest problem.
There was a way for Democrats to win a national election.
Well, that's the greatest question of the night. Why are the Democrats pretty good at getting to the end zone in NFL terms, but not good at putting on a show in the end zone? I mean, they get the damn touchdown. They don't do any hot dog. They don't do anything. I mean, if W had gotten this 17,000 in the stock market, if he had reduced the unemployment rate, they would be bragging.
But hang on.
Up 2%, never mentioned.
The rural economy is not good.
I know, but the numbers are good.
And by the way, the rural economy is not good.
The rural economy.
And guess where these Senate races are being fought? In places that have a higher propensity of rural Americans. That is the difference. These races are not in
but Chuck, I would have connected,
urban economies are doing better.
But I would have connected the rural economy to some of the public sector things that were blocked by Republicans.
If you don't toot your own horn, the other guy won't toot it for you.
All right, coming up, our first look at the exit polls early into election night. This is data that you do not have yet. You don't have it from anywhere, but you are about to get it right here. MSNBC's live coverage of Decision 2014 continues right after this. Stay with us.
Back to MSNBC's live coverage of the midterm elections tonight. Let's get on. It's an early look right now at what the voters are actually telling people tonight about how they voted, why they voted. Tamron Hall will be tracking that for us all evening. They're called exit polls. We'd love to know what people are saying. This is their chance to speak through Tamron Hall. Tamron, thank you for telling us what the world is saying through their votes tonight.
That's an interesting way to put it. Voters are speaking through me, but they're speaking through the exit polls, and they are clearly, guys, not pleased with the job Congress is doing. Take a look at some of the numbers that we've already gotten here. Nearly half of those we spoke with, 48%, disapprove of the job being done on Capitol Hill. Just this number, 20% of overall voters in our exit polling agree and feel that Congress is doing a good job. But let's break it down for the president. His numbers are slightly higher. When you take a look at the number here, 44% approve of the job that President Obama is doing. 42% strongly disapprove. And guys, this is really interesting. Take a look at this sidebar we've peeked into. President Obama's approval is nearly identical to those of George W. Bush in the 60s 6th year of his presidency. President Obama at 44%, George W. Bush in 2006 at 43%. And back in 1998, Bill Clinton's approval was at 55%. So that's the early glimpse of what we're getting into the exit polling room, and we'll bring you more data throughout the night.
Tamron, thank you. Fascinating stuff, especially, I mean, looking at those numbers for Clinton and George W. Bush, right? We haven't had very many two-term presidents. Right. In the 20th and 21st century. But Bill Clinton in 98, that was in that sixth-term midterm, that second-term midterm for him, he actually did a lot better than the historical average would suggest. He was one time that the president's party actually sort of picked up seats in a way that history would suggest was impossible. It's because he had that very high approval number. George
and
W.
one other
Bush,
thing, there was a news story there. They were ready to kill him on Monica, and everybody thought they overdid it. I think when you see aberrations in these midterms where the party in power does well, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis way back in '62, which helped Kennedy because he handled it so well. He handled it like a hawk, but he handled it very deftly. And Bill Clinton, I think everybody knew that he was involved with Monica. Everybody knew he was BSing the country. But they also thought that Congress overreacted. Yes. And I think that's the way people voted. They said, enough already. You made your point. Censure the guy and shut up, basically.
And that drove his approval ratings to the point where it turned that midterm election from what history suggested.
And can I sound a bit like a Marxist here because people accuse this? I really do think economics drives almost everything. Yeah. And in 1998, the economy was doing really well. Just like if you want to look at Nixon's problems, of course, there was cover-up of Watergate, but there was tremendous stagflation. People were feeling terrible. People will forgive a president who's effective. They'll approve it. They'll put up with his...
They will do so when they can vote for the president. In a midterm, though, it's almost always party pendulum that affects how people vote.
Then the 6th year, you're right. Yeah. In fact, you know the average. 6 losses tonight would be typical. Yeah. And I think... But I do think that... the economy is overrun. Look at our numbers. You ask people the biggest thing they worry about the economy because everybody gets home to their kitchen table and they forget about politics for a while. And they go back, they never forget about their lives, but they forget about politics. Yeah. I was doing an interview the other day trying to talk about Tip and the Gipper, and a reporter said to me, oh, when did Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, begin her relationship with Ronald Reagan? So, I mean, not everybody watches it as closely as we do.
Right.
You know,
that's fascinating.
They're vaguely aware of it.
Talking about President Obama and how much the Republicans have tried to make this about him and Democrats have freaked out with that confrontation. President Obama himself did do a bunch of radio interviews today, last-minute radio hits, including this one in Hartford, Connecticut, trying to get out the vote.
Take the time to go out and vote. It's something that is part of our civic obligations. And our founding fathers and subsequent generations fought for that franchise. It matters in terms of day-to-day how kids are going to be able to learn and whether jobs are created and whether we're protecting the environment. There are big issues at stake. Don't leave it to somebody else. Make sure to go to the polls.
Go to the polls. President Obama, one of over 10 radio interviews the president has done over the past 2 days, trying to make the closing argument, the last-minute case to voters that they need to go out and vote, get out to the polls for these midterm elections. It should be noted, though, in Connecticut, that was a radio interview from Hartford. In Connecticut, polling problems in Hartford this morning could have an outsized impact on that state's tight-as-a-tick contest for governor. The Connecticut governor's race is really close. And when voting began in Connecticut this morning, some precincts in Hartford were not ready because apparently the voter registration lists had not arrived. Connecticut Governor Dale Malloy's re-election campaign went to court this afternoon to argue that the affected polling places should stay open late to accommodate voters who'd had to leave this morning without casting a ballot because the polling places weren't ready when they were supposed to be. Republicans opposed extending the hours at all, but a couple of hours ago, just tonight, a judge in Connecticut reached a decision ruling that 2 specific Hartford polling places would remain open for a half hour longer than had been previously suggested. This is a fascinating race because this is a rematch from 2010. There's only 6,000 votes between Dan Malloy and Tom Foley in 2010 without running up huge margins in places like Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport. Dan Malloy never could have won. If the voting is screwed up in Hartford, Dan Malloy isn't going to be able to win for technical reasons, let alone what else happens in the state.
It's very interesting how you have irregularities, you know, and you never know for sure whether it's just screwing it up or there's intentional strategic efforts to keep down the vote in key areas.
Throughout the night, we're going to be talking with our friends and strategists, Democrat Robert Gibbs and Republican Steve Schmidt. We've got you at sort of strategist central, fellas. Thank you for wearing matching ties. Thank you for both being here tonight. In terms of this issue about whether or not this election is about President Obama, was that necessarily always going to be bad news for Democrats? Did they have a choice in how to handle this? Republicans knew what they wanted. Democrats seem like they never did.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting, and you both have talked about this, there's the 6-year itch problem. In 1986, Ronald Reagan was at 63% and lost 9 Senate seats. There is a 6-year history problem that affects Republicans and Democrats. I think what will be interesting to see at the end of the night, did Republicans nationalizing this election help bring those very base drop-off voters that Democrats need to win in some of these close races out by talking about how much they were opposed to the president, how much they were going to do to stop the president? Did that actually activate voters that would normally have sat out an election except for a presidential year?
Steve, when Republicans consider the strategy like that, is that something you have to worry about, that they're going to cause a backlash among people who like the guy they're targeting?
Look, there's no doubt when you're talking about a midterm election, one of the issues you're dealing with is a Republican turnout advantage, and that might have been wiped away by the dynamic that you're explaining. But look, this is the most expensive midterm election in the history of American politics, and the overwhelming majority of the ads have been of Republicans saying, I'm not Barack Obama. I'm going to oppose Barack Obama. My opponent votes with Barack Obama in the case of Kay Hagan 96% of the time. And, of course, the Democratic candidates have tried to say, look, I'm an independent voice. I agree with him on some issues, disagree on the others. And we'll see how that plays out in a geographic terrain that is overwhelmingly favorable for Republicans tonight.
Let's talk about the politicians you guys know pretty well and how they all say they don't watch television. They're all watching every minute of this tonight. It's only a question we'd like to find out who they're with. But, Rob, I want to ask you about this question. The president's watching. He had to run an almost stealth campaign. A lot of black radio, but avoiding big national statements. He didn't try to get up on stage all week or the last month at all. Right. How much is that going to bother him? Just the fact that he had to go quietly into the night, basically. Of course, he went to Connecticut. He went to North Philly, to Temple, and a few other places. But he knows he's almost not as bad as LBJ was at one point. But the fact he had to go undercover in an election year?
Well, I think you guys put up the numbers. It reminds me of the atmosphere politically in 2006, and the approval numbers show it between George W. Bush and a parallel with Barack Obama. He's one of the most competitive people I've ever met, so of course it bothered him not to be out there more. He did end up mostly in safe places, and the question is, did some of that stealth campaigning, did a lot of radio interviews, particularly in the African-American community, help on turnout?
Look, this election speaks to the enduring wisdom of Harry Truman, who said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. You have
the president has two.
Right, you have an enormous number of these Democratic senators that owe their seats, owe their election to Barack Obama's spectacular rise in 2008, not a few in 2012. And, of course, you now see the dynamic playing out where they don't know him, they don't support him. In Alison Lundgren Grimes' case, won't acknowledge whether she voted for him or not. This is just Washington politics. And what's interesting about it is the dynamic of politicians is that every one of these senators, when they're back Republican or Democrats, in the presence of the President of the United States, will be obsequious towards him, will act as if he is their best friend, will want to have their pictures taken with them. This is just part of the time-honored ritual of American politics. But what's interesting, I think, for the Democrats is there was only one way through that mountain pass, and it wasn't distancing yourself from President Obama, because it's very difficult to do if you've supported his policies 95, 96% of the time on the vote. So you have to acknowledge reality. You have to lean into the wave. You have to embrace reality. And I think you've seen some of the Democratic candidates out there fumbling around with this issue. We'll watch how that plays out tonight.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, you make a great point. In 2008, it was probably as good a year as Democrats could have had. We won seats, Senate races in Alaska, that everyone knew 6 years later would be hard to hold. These first couple seats that we're going to see, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Kay Hagan in a great Democratic year got 53%. Jeanne Shaheen in a great Democratic year got 52%. So while I think there's a lot of real estate that is very dark red and is going to be very tough terrain for Democrats, what will be interesting to watch is how big this so-called wave is when we look at the 4 Senate seats that are in in purple states, right? Yeah. New Hampshire, North Carolina, Iowa, and Colorado. I think what we talk about tomorrow morning will be largely dependent upon, in those 4 races, do Republicans win 3 or 4 of those, or do Democrats split or hold 3 or 4 of those?
And what's fascinating about it is when you look at some of these states where the president's approval numbers are in the high 30s to low 40s, if Republicans can't win in this environment with 70% believing the economy is in the wrong direction in some of these states, very ominous sign for the Republican Party heading into 16.
Steve, thank you. And Robin, I want to ask Steve later on the night, when you have time to think about it, how much John McCain will be enjoying this victory if he gets the chairmanship of the Armed Services Committee at the end of the night over the dead body of the president. Basically a miserable night for him. He'll probably be enjoying that, won't he?
I don't think he would be very upset about being chairman of the Armed Services Committee.
That's a mean way to put it, but I had to do it. Up next, we're going to go to the man in charge of getting Democrats elected to Congress. This is MSNBC's live coverage of election night. We'll be right back after this.
We are just under 25 minutes from poll closing time in some key states, including the hotly contested races in Kentucky and Georgia. Melissa Harris-Perry is with us now from Kay Hagan's headquarters in Greensboro, North Carolina. Melissa, thanks very much for being with us.
Absolutely. Happy to be with you tonight.
In terms of this race in North Carolina, obviously it has national implications, but it has been hard fought from every state borderline in North Carolina. The ground game there on both sides has just been epic. What's it been like in state, and what are you expecting tonight?
Well, I mean, I think, I think the overwhelming feeling for North Carolina voters is that they are glad it's going to be over because the commercials alone are bombarding at such a rate that you can barely sort of think through programming because there are so many commercials. But I think, part of what we're going to learn tonight, I think if there is a Hagan win, despite the fact that we are in excess of $100 million spent in these 2 campaigns, the most expensive Senate race in North Carolina history. Despite that, it may not, in fact, be that spending that would have made the difference if, in fact, Hagan wins. I actually think that it'll have much more to do with a set of campaigns going on outside of the Hagan campaign itself. So that is the Moral Mondays movement, which used in many ways Tom Tillis as the character that they have been organized against now for more than a year. In these weekly meetings, those demonstrations that were growing first from the dozens and then ultimately to the thousands of North Carolinians showing up and saying that this state legislature had pulled too far to the right, all of that was really about a social movement on the ground. So if we see a Democratic win here, it is actually unlikely to be because of the Democrat herself, and I think much more likely to be about the effectiveness of a social movement. And I think that would be an extraordinary story to be able to tell at the end of the night.
Melissa, in terms of the North Carolina, the closeness of the race there is a third-party candidate on the ballot there, a libertarian who hasn't received a ton of attention, even as Sean Hawes. Everybody's been so focused on this top of the ticket race. Is there any indication of any? Are you seeing, signs for him on the side of the road? Is there any indication of any sort of support for him that might be significant enough in such a close race that he could be a decisive factor?
Well, so look, there's been some conservative spending that is pro-Sean Hawes spending. The goal of it being, so it's both sort of emphasizing his interest in the questions of peace over war, but also the legalization of marijuana and some other currently illegal drugs. And I think the idea is to try to pull some portion of the kind of millennial vote, youth vote away from Hagan, because it would only take just a tiny percentage to do that. I think that is the kind of strategy that could work very well in a general election, but in an election that is a midterm, that is relatively low information, relatively low turnout, it's the decline part of surge and decline. the idea that the young people who are going to show up to vote are going to be that easily swayed, as opposed to showing up to vote because they already have very strong preferences for one candidate or another. My bet is that as fun as the Sean Haas story is, I bet it's unlikely to make much of a difference in the results tonight.
Fascinating.
Anyway, I'm not a big fan of third-party candidates because they do that kind of messing up with the race. Anyway, Alex Wagner's with us now from Scott Brown headquarters up in Manchester, New Hampshire. Well, I'm waiting to hear what you have to say, Alex, because you're a pro, and that race up there, we were just up there last week, and I loved your question to the Republican candidate, by the way. He really seemed to like it, too, about what zip code he was going to have if he lost.
I don't know about that. I don't know that he liked the question, Chris, but I definitely did ask Scott Brown whether his zip code might change tomorrow if he loses this race. He, of course, came across state lines from Massachusetts to New Hampshire. Very recently could not vote in the state. He was not eligible last year. His answer to my question was, that's a silly question, which is interesting insofar as it's not really an answer. And one would think that at this point, Scott Brown would have a very pat answer to that question. And in part, I don't think he has a really particularly well-developed answer because he's made this into a national race. I mean, you drive throughout New Hampshire, as we did a little bit this morning, and there are signs saying, stand with Obama, vote Shaheen. Jeanne Shaheen's campaign did not put those signs in the ground. That is something that Scott Brown has done, and he's done it because New Hampshire Republicans until September, 6 weeks ago, were not really necessarily on Scott Brown's side. I mean, this guy had to make up a huge gulf with members of his own party, and he did so by making this into a race between Scott Brown and Barack Obama.
Let's talk about Google. Google, I was looking at the other day. It seems like one of the interesting people they're interested in his centerfold, of course. People are looking that up. But they're looking up Hillary Clinton when they're looking up Jeanne Shaheen. She was up there yesterday. Will this be one of the races, if Shaheen does hold on, one of the races where the Clintons will be able to say, especially Secretary Clinton, we had an impact?
Well, you know, as I do, Chris, that Hillary Clinton has a soft spot for New Hampshire. It is where she, quote, found her voice. And look, I mean, it is undeniable that Jeanne Shaheen is liked in this state. Her favorability is pretty great. Her money, her resources are there, and she has a pretty formidable ground game. So, you know, in this way, it's weird insofar as Jeanne Shaheen is not as much on the ballot as Barack Obama and Scott Brown are. If she can claim credit, that's entirely owed to her and really no one else.
Alex Wagner reporting tonight from New Hampshire. Alex, we will be back with you. Enjoy the night. It's going to be fun and probably a long night there. Luke Russert is in Iowa. He's at the West Des Moines headquarters of the Republican Senate candidate in Iowa, Joni Ernst. Luke, I have to, based on everything I'm reading about Iowa right now, I have to believe that the Joni Ernst folks are excited and confident tonight. What does it seem like on the ground?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say momentum is certainly with the Ernst campaign. The Des Moines Register poll that came in on Saturday, which is really considered the gold standard of Iowa polling, showing her with a 7-point lead. Also leading on the question of whether or not who cares more about people like me. That's terrible for a Democrat to trail on that question. What really interested me, though, is these early voting numbers that we saw officially here today in Iowa, something that's so important. The Democrats only are plus 8,228, if you see there. You see there on the screen, 183,898 compared to the Republicans 175,670. If you go back over the years, in 2012 they were plus 57,000. In 2010 they were plus 16,000. So because they're only up about 8,200 in the early vote, that's leading a lot of operatives to believe that will not be enough to keep away Joni Ernst's day of voting Republican strength, which is something that we see here over the years. Mitt Romney actually won in terms of votes just cast on Election Day last time around. So I would say tip of the scale to Ernst, and she's really had a campaign, guys, that's been based on personality and charisma. If you go through the issues and the attacks Bruce Braley has tried to make, he's tried to stick her as being out of touch on Social Security. At one time she talked about privatization. That didn't stick. Out of touch on Medicare. That didn't stick. This is a state where the governor, a Republican, Terry Branstad, actually worked with the state legislature to implement Obamacare. They got 80,000 Iowans enrolled in Medicaid, over 100,000 Iowans enrolled in the actual law. Decently popular here in Iowa. Joni Ernst wants a full repeal of that and still believes the state can be the healthiest in the country, as Governor Branstad, the Republican, wants, if there is in fact a full repeal of Obamacare. Where the establishment of the Republican Party has succeeded is evident here in Iowa. They have taken someone who had Tea Party credentials in the primary, they've moderated her for the general, made her much more packageable to Iowa independents and Iowa voters. And I suspect if she comes out victorious tonight, she will sort of be what everyone on the Republican side points to is what can happen if they get the right consultants, the right media training, the right branding, and they package themselves in a more conciliatory way moving forward, guys.
Wow. The packaging of Joni Ernst, the castrator, the hog castrator. Amazing piece of work by those people.
That's how she launched her career. Huh?
Yeah, and we're going to find out what she actually becomes if she does win. Anyway, thank you, Luke Russert, out there in Des Moines. Right now, we're joined by U.S. Congressman Steve Israel. Of course, he's chairman of the DCCC, we call it, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. It's his job to win tonight. Let me ask you about, I'm going to be really positive with you, Steve, my friend. I'm going to ask you the points of light. Where do you see your party pulling some upsets tonight against the wind conditions?
Well, look, there's no question, Chris, it's a tough environment, tough terrain. But here's what's different. We're only a few hours from all the polls closing, and yet not one single Democratic incumbent in any competitive district is down and out. In 2010, going into early October, we knew that about 50 of our incumbents were in trouble. 30 of them weren't going to win. But we have fortified our incumbents so that there's not one single incumbent right now that we're ruling out. They're all competitive. I think we also have some really strong challenges. I mean, we have Republicans back on their heels in Nebraska. We have them back on their heels in the panhandle of Florida. We have them back on their heels in Iowa. We have them back on their heels in a race in California. Look, my takeaway is that we still have 20 competitive races. And I think not only will it be a long night before we know where we land, but it may be a couple days before we know where we land.
Well, here's the key question to a lot of people. Can you take a loss that's so big tonight that even Hillary Clinton, if she runs and wins the nomination next time and comes in, but unable to bring the House with her because you guys have lost such a margin of defeat up there that even her successful win with maybe 52, 53% of the popular vote wouldn't be enough to bring in. Is it still within reach that if Hillary runs next year in 2016, after tonight's over, the Democrats can still win the House next time? Is it still within reach?
Absolutely, I guarantee you that it's within reach. Look, you talked about it earlier. The historic loss in a 6-year midterm for the president's party is 29. So that's what history teaches us. Even Ronald Reagan, when he was very popular in 1986, he lost a bunch of seats. That's just history. But what I think is going to happen, Chris, is that these Republicans, they're going to double down. I mean, I can't imagine Ted Cruz and Rubio saying, we won the majority in the Senate if they win. And we won more seats in the House. Now is the time to compromise. No, they're not going to compromise. They're going to double down. They're going to fall further and further out of the mainstream. They're going to alienate voters, which I believe puts the House in play in 2016 and makes it a very good cycle for Democrats because they're going to lose independent swing voters in suburban districts.
Congressman Steve Israel, head of the DCCC, in charge of electing Democrats to the House, as he acknowledged in a very tough environment. Congressman Israel, thanks very much for being with us. Appreciate it. The eternal optimism of the people in charge of doing stuff like that. All right, less than 15 minutes now until the polls close in Kentucky and in Georgia. Two big, nay, huge Senate races that we are watching tonight. We're coming right up on it. This is MSNBC's live coverage of Election Night. We're back right after this. Top of the hour, I want to bring in MSNBC's Al Sharpton and Chris Hayes, as well as the MSNBC political correspondent who has worn out more shoe leather than anybody else not actually running for office this election season. I'm not exaggerating when I say that correspondent Casey Hunt has interviewed virtually every major candidate in a battleground state this year. Watch this.
You all ready to do democracy? Are you ready to get those ballots out? Hey, Casey, I don't really want to talk to you.
I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm.
What does castrating hogs involve?
A very delicate hand. Let's put it like that.
Would you want him to come down and campaign for you?
I speak for myself and don't need any other surrogate to do that.
You and Scott Brown keep wanting to make this race about the president, but this race is about New Hampshire.
If you lose this race, will you and your family commit to staying here in New Hampshire?
Of course. My mom is 5 miles away.
Who would you caucus with if you're elected?
Well, that's a great question and a great point. What I've said.
You are going to have to decide.
He's for Obamacare, all right, and he's for amnesty,
okay?
I think that's part of this sense of entitlement. It almost is like, I serve my country, therefore let me to the Senate.
You going to win in Arkansas, yes or no?
Yes.
Are you going to Louisiana?
Yes.
Iowa?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
North Carolina?
Yes.
You got any no's? Alaska?
Yes.
What we know about this election season, we know in large part because Casey Hunt was there annoying the candidates and their surrogates by asking them face to face.
They did seem a little annoyed by the end.
Well, did you feel like by traveling out to meet folks on the ground, going to all these places where they're campaigning, that you learned a different story than what the Beltway and the national media are talking about and how these things are being contested?
Well, you know, I think it gives you a couple different perspectives. First of all, it gives you a real sense of which candidates are stronger than other candidates. I mean, people, you know, when we're looking at this from inside the Beltway, we tend to discount, what are these people like? Are they good at this? Do they love it? Do they work hard? And being out there sort of gives you a sense of those kinds of things. And the other thing is it also can allow you to pick up on trends a little bit sooner than we might otherwise in Washington. When you're talking to people on the ground, they're telling you what they're seeing in that moment. And it takes some time for that to get back to folks in D.C.
Chris, the touchy ones are losing, right?
I'm sorry?
The touchy ones are losing.
Yes, the touchy ones and the ones who, you know, I mean, Democrats in particular struggled with a lot of these questions. I mean, the question about President Obama is a very straightforward one, and people really struggle to answer it.
Chris Hayes, on that question about whether or not President Obama is the guy on the ballot, even though he's not on the ballot this year, could Democrats have handled it differently than they did?
I think they could have. I think the one place where they really could have is around, actually, the Affordable Care Act. What happened was the Republicans always thought this would be another Affordable Care Act referendum election, and then it clearly became the case that they no longer had the politics in their favor. And rather than seeing Republicans retreating as a sign of political weakness and attacking, Democrats and Republicans came to this weird kind of truce in which the central political debate of the last 6 years was just thrown out the window by everyone. We're just not going to talk about health care at all. It just won't be an issue because Democrats were so scarred from fighting those battles in successive elections, because Republicans realized the wind was no longer on their backs of the issue. All of a sudden, this thing that has been the center of American domestic political debate, that is the largest piece of social legislation in 30 years, is just nowhere to be found on the campaign trail.
They just dropped it.
Anyway. Okay, I got to go back to this. When we come back, I was going to ask the Reverend Sharp a brilliant question, but I'll get to it later. And then the rolls will have just closed. The polls are just closing in some key states. The key ones right now, Kentucky and Georgia, coming up in a minute. Our first results of the night coming here in seconds. It's nearly 7 p.m. on the East Coast right now, and the polls are about to close in Kentucky, Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina, and Vermont. And we'll get to the first look at the big Senate races in Kentucky and Georgia right now, as well as the Georgia governor's race, where Jason Carter, the grandson of the former president, is looking to unseat Republican incumbent Nathan Deal. And, you know, we are waiting for news because this is after months and months and months. And finally, the crackle of victory and defeat, the agony of defeat, it's all going to come starting in a minute. Well, in about 10 seconds. Sometimes when you have a poll closing and you have a call right at the poll closing, it tells you a lot more about the race retrospectively than you could have known before that exact moment. Yeah, it wasn't a close one, and in some cases, a lot of the early vote came in, a lot of the absentee vote came in that could have been coded ahead of time. But these are our first results tonight, and the first one is a big one. The NBC News projects that the winner of the Kentucky Senate race is Mitch McConnell. This is being projected at poll closing. Incumbent Senator Mitch McConnell wins in Kentucky, defeats Allison Lundergren Grimes. In Georgia, the Senate race there is being characterized by NBC News as too early to call. This is Michelle Nunn versus David Perdue. That's an open Senate seat in the state of Georgia, a very hotly contested race. NBC News can project the winner in the South Carolina Senate race. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, incumbent senator, is reelected there. Also in South Carolina, special election for a Senate race there. Tim Scott, the incumbent who is serving out the partial term there, is elected in South Carolina. In the Virginia Senate race, this is interesting. Incumbent Democrat Mark Warner, right now too early to call in his race against Republican Ed Gillespie. Again, that's the Virginia Senate race at this hour. NBC calling it too early to call. Overall, in the Senate at this hour, what we can tell you is there are 33 Republican seats in the Senate. There are 32 Democratic seats in the Senate and 2 independents who have previously caucused with Democrats. But that's the overall balance that we'll be watching tonight in terms of who gets
to 50. Now on to some of the governor's races. Georgia not only has a tightly fought Senate race, they've also got a governor's race that right now NBC is calling too early to call. This is Jason Carter, the Democrat, and Nathan Deal, the incumbent Republican governor. In South Carolina, NBC News can project that the winner of the South Carolina governor's race is the incumbent governor, Republican Nikki Haley. In other governor's races this hour, we can take you to the great state of Vermont. Peter Shumlin is the incumbent Democrat there. Scott Milne is his Republican challenger. At this point, they're calling this too early to call. One thing to know about this Vermont governor's race is that there is a 50% threshold for winning a race like this. It makes it a different threshold for calling it, a different threshold for winning than you'll see in some other races. But at this point, NBC News says in Vermont, it is too early to call between Peter Shumlin and his Republican challenger, Scott Milne. Fascinating. Mitch McConnell,
nice guys, finished first. Anyway, no more comment on that one.
We don't know if he's going to be majority leader. We don't know if the Republicans are going to win the Senate, but we know that he's going to be back.
Interesting race, I think, in Virginia. Mark Warner's a very successful and I thought safe incumbent. The fact that Ed Gillespie, the former chair of the party, had the guts to run against him and is apparently running a good campaign shows audacity, which is what politics is all about. It's about ego and audacity. You're willing to take on the tough race. Looks like he's going to keep it close long enough to make it a good fight. He'll be the next governor. That's what that race is about. He wants to be Terry McAuliffe. They were both at Catholic U together. It's just his chance to match Terry McAuliffe. These little intramural fights are fascinating to watch.
You think this Senate race is about running for governor?
This is set up for governor. Yeah, that's what you do. You run once, win the next time. That's true in Georgia. Jason Carter, you think this is his last run for governor? Took his grandfather a while.
39,
he will run again, and he'll get it eventually, because the way you get your name out there, unless you're a born zillionaire or self-financer, run a few times. That's how Bob Casey's made it in Pennsylvania, both of them. You run a few times, people get used to you, they get to trust you, and then you finally get the job. So it's about endurance. I do think it's interesting, however, we've probably given on our program, or Hardball, you've probably done the same, given more attention to the Kentucky race than any race in the country. And yet here we see good old Mitch McConnell chunking in $2 million of his own money at the last minute. I'm sure his wife is probably saying, why'd you spend that money? It was easy.
It could have been closer, and then we'd be
paid for a landslide. Why'd we pay for a blowout? So it's a little funny, but it is sad, because this is a young woman, audacity again. She had the audacity to run against this incredibly powerful incumbent with all the tricky moves he had up his sleeve, and sarcasm and ridicule, all those tricks. She'll be back. She's going to try again and probably go for another race for the Senate.
And especially because she's so close to the Clintons, who we clearly haven't seen the last of for the next couple of years.
She might be the candidate.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell also is, Harry Reid pulled out that 2010 victory by a nose, and he knew his state and he worked his state, and Harry Reid is not an accidental politician. I think sometimes when you watch Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell from the perspective of the cameras, from the perspective of their performance as orators, you think, really, these are the guys that are running their caucuses? When you watch them engage in these kinds of operations where they know every local chieftain, where they know how to work their states and what parts of their states need, these guys are pros, both of them.
You've been ruling for 30 years.
They know what they're doing.
Well, by the way, dirty little secret of the Senate, they don't want George Clooney as their spokesman.
No, they do not. That is right.
They don't want someone that's going to outshine them or be better looking or anything. They want a guy that's going to keep the day going, keep the jobs going, make sure they keep their job.
Well, the word to use with those guys is careful. They know where their vote is, and they carefully and methodically go after that vote. McConnell never, there was concern early on, but at the end of the day, he knew where he had to get his vote. And then, of course, he always counts on his opponent to fumble the ball.
I love George F. Will. He's been around forever. He's a very consistent conservative columnist. And he said, Mitch McConnell's been compared to looking like me. And he said, sharp but true. It's not about charisma. Let's go right now to somebody who's there on the ground. Perry Bacon's there. He's our senior political reporter. He's on the ground at headquarters. How's the nice guy handling his apparent victory here?
They haven't actually announced it here yet, so people are still kind of waiting. But the numbers are called. We're told tonight McConnell's going to give a speech, but he's going to talk about Kentucky. He's not going to stay up, honestly, to make sure, see who won Alaska and that kind of thing. They're going to clear us out at midnight, they told us. So he's going to give a speech about Kentucky tonight, and then tomorrow he's going to talk about the broader implications of if he's in a majority leader or what he wants to do next. So wait on his sort of broader remarks about his views on being majority leader or maybe not being majority leader by tomorrow, but not tonight.
Perry, are you saying that right now they don't know that NBC News has projected Mitch McConnell to be the winner of this race?
McConnell's staff does, we just told them, but as far as the audience itself, right now, they have not cheered. They don't know this yet. That's why we were sort of waiting for that to happen, but they've not put in the screen yet the projection itself. So we're still waiting on that, the excitement that'll be here for his victory, which, of course, was not. So people here also, there's a lot of, in this crowd, there's a lot of political operators here, and now you're hearing it for the first time. People are now, there you go.
Hey, Kentucky, don't mean to let you in on the secret, but
Your guy won.
Here's a little something that you supposedly have been dying to hear. Well, Perry, feel free to just start shouting it in case it's going to make people buy you drinks. We'll be checking back in with you, Perry Bacon at McConnell headquarters. Thank you. That was really funny. You never know what to do with that.
Well, he liked good news from the media.
Yeah.
Senator, good news.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
And you know who else is at McConnell headquarters tonight is Senator Rand Paul, who played a key role not only in McConnell's campaign, but is also going to be a really critical player in a potential Republican Senate as a potential bridge between McConnell and wherever our conservatives end up, led by Senator.
Really fascinating thing to watch in Kentucky, and this sounds like small ball, but it's going to become the most important thing in the world really fast, is the question of whether or not the Kentucky House, the state legislature, goes Republican. It's one of the last, if not the last, legislative chamber in the South that has not gone to the Republicans. And the reason it matters is because Kentucky has a state law which says you can't run for 2 federal offices at once. Rand Paul's going to run for president in 2016. That's also when his Senate seat is up. He doesn't want to have to give up his Senate seat to run for president.
There's a precedent. The great Barry Goldwater gave up his seat, gave it up in Arizona just so he could be an honest candidate and say he wasn't Lieberman playing it tricky. Oh, I want both jobs in case I lose. No, he says I'm running for one office at a time. That's gutsy. Put your neck out there.
There's also a lot of precedent of state legislatures being willing to bend the home state rules.
Of course,
they may not do it as long as Democrats hold on to that house.
That's true.
But that's part of the reason I think
this could be Allison Grimes. This could be Allison Grimes' chance. If Rand Paul gets the nomination, she gets the seat. Everybody's happy, except Mitch McConnell. Anyway.
Let's bring in Steve Kornacki at this point. With Kentucky off the table, Steve Kornacki, what does that look like in terms of the Democrats' survival guide for tonight?
Yeah, well, let's go to the big board and take you through it. So how do the Democrats get through tonight? As you say, we would have, as of 20 minutes ago, had Kentucky in this middle column of undecided. It's gone. It's gone to the Republicans. It's added to their tally. They're at 46. So let's take you through what the Democrats need now with 9 battleground states up here. You look at Arkansas, the polls haven't closed. We'll see what happens there, but the expectation is that will go the way of Kentucky. That will be a Republican pickup. On the other side, we talked earlier about the must-win states for Democrats. New Hampshire with Jeanne Shaheen, Kay Hagan in North Carolina. Let's say the Democrats get those. We don't know. They must win them, so let's say they get them. Add these to the Democratic column. The other sort of juicy target on this board for Democrats right now is Kansas. Now, there's no Democrat running there, but you heard Joe Biden, the vice president today, even saying, look, that independent, if he wins, he's going to caucus with us. We don't know what he's going to do, but Democrats need him to do that if he wins. Let's say that happens. Let's add Greg Orman, the independent, winning and caucusing with the Democrats. Now, that leaves you with 5 states up here in the middle. Now, we've got 2 here that are sort of wild cards. I want to put them at the bottom right now. These are Louisiana and Georgia. These are states where runoffs are likely in Louisiana, possible in Georgia. We'll talk more about those later. Leave them down here for right now. That leaves you with Alaska, Iowa, Colorado. Now, think about where the Democrats are right now in this scenario. They're at 46. And now here's the key. You have to add 2 more because Bernie Sanders and Angus King are independents who currently caucus with them. So add 2 to that 46, puts them at 48. They need to get to 50. So they're too short. You got these 3 states on the board tonight. Now, the absolute bare minimum in this scenario that Democrats need, let's say they lose Alaska. Let's say they lose Colorado. It doesn't work out for Udall, the incumbent there. And let's say Joni Ernst, the Republican, wins in Iowa. Everything goes wrong in those 3 states for Democrats. The Republicans are still going to be short. The Democrats would then go to the runoffs in these 2 states and have a chance there. However, the odds of the Democrats surviving in the runoffs in these 2 states, those are sort of the 2 worst bets of those 5, not good. So more likely for the Democrats. You go to Colorado, you go to Iowa, you go to Alaska, you look at these 3 states and you say more likely for Democrats tonight, they're going to have to win 1 in maybe 2 of these states. So these 3, keep a close eye on them tonight. Democrats probably going to need 1. As I say, it may end up being 2 that they need from here. And they're all upsets.
Let's bring in right now a member of the United States Senate already who will remain so, Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator, you're watching this whole thing. Would you explain to people watching who don't really know the way that Senate operates and organizes, what's the significance if the Republicans grab control? What does it mean in terms of what's likely to come out of the Senate the next 2 years if they even have a one-seat advantage coming out of tonight?
Well, there's a number of consequences. I know a lot of people watch the pace of the Senate and the number of pieces of legislation have come out and wonder what the difference is. But the fact is that the agenda is controlled by the majority. The chairmen who oversee these committees are determined only by the majority. And maybe most importantly for the Senate, the president's appointees to various agencies and to the federal bench is determined by the majority, especially now that we've changed the rules such that 50 votes can put a nominee through. I think you're going to see the president's appointees effectively shut down. It's a government shutdown by another mechanism. They're not going to stop funding the government. They're just going to stop populating it with the president's appointees. So I think that's probably the most significant change you'll see.
Well, let me hit you with a couple ones because people are nervous about it. Will there be a vote on immigration? Because the Senate with Democratic leadership did pass an immigration bill with 12 Republicans. Well, even if the Republicans pick up the leadership by a vote or two, will there still be enough power there to pass a decent immigration bill like you did before?
No, the problem is that this is going to be perceived as a victory for the Tea Party. These people like Joni Ernst and Tom Cotton, they're not going to be working with the moderates who are trying to pass immigration reform. They're going to be stopping it. And so I don't see any way that that sort of middle-of-the-road agenda that people like John McCain or Lindsey Graham have supported in the past is going to be able to get support from that caucus, which is going to be radicalized by this election.
Wow, terrible.
Senator Murphy, when you're looking ahead at this Connecticut governor's race tonight, there's been some concern about voting in Hartford. Judge has ordered 2 specific voting places in Hartford to be held open a half hour later than they otherwise would have been. It seemed like those places had a hard time getting open this morning. We know that Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy's strategy really depends on turning out big margins in cities like Hartford, in the urban areas in your state. Are you worried about either shenanigans or just failure in terms of the ability to pull off the election in Connecticut today in a way that may affect what happens there?
Yeah, I'm not worried because what we've seen in the cities here in Connecticut across the day is higher turnout this year than you saw in 2010. Governor Malloy went into the election day 4 years ago down by 3 points. He won by about 6,000 votes. He's going in up by 2 or 3 points this time. I think he'll pull it off. You know, Connecticut is a blue state for federal purposes, but we've elected a lot of Republican governors over the past 20 years, so it's not really that surprising that this is a dogfight here.
Thank you, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. It's good to have you with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, coming up, we have some breaking news, actually, in the Florida governor's race. We're going to be going live to Charlie Crist's headquarters in St. Petersburg. That's next. You're watching MSNBC's special coverage of election night. The big news so far is Senator Mitch McConnell in Kentucky being reelected. That was a call at the closing of the polls. There's a lot still to come tonight. Stay with us. Welcome back to MSNBC's coverage of election night, along with the battle for control of the Senate. We are closely watching governor's races across the country. 36 governor's races are up tonight, and there is the possibility that we could see a record number of sitting governors bounced out of office tonight. Sitting governors of both parties. These races, of course, have national implications as well as very important governing implications in the states. Some big presidential battleground states are picking governors tonight. States that include Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Florida. Our MSNBC colleague Ed Schultz is in St. Petersburg, Florida right now. He's at the headquarters of the Charlie Crist for Governor campaign. And I'm told, Ed, that you've got some breaking news about the Florida election right now.
Well, I have to start tonight with a smile, Rachel, because in the land of the Bush-Gore lawsuits, I hadn't even got a cup of coffee here tonight to start tonight. We already got a lawsuit on our hands. Charlie Crist camp is very concerned about what's unfolding in Broward County. Number one, it's not the kind of turnout they were looking for. Early voting was pretty good. But the Democrats have to score well in Broward. They have to score well in Dade and in Palm Beach County. Now, what happened in Broward early this morning is that the polling places were opening up late because there were some irregularities with some of the machines. There was also a great deal of misinformation and voters were confused. So late this afternoon, Charlie Crist camp, which by the numbers statewide off to a pretty good start, they have asked for a motion to extend the voting hours in Broward County. Now, generically speaking, you can come to the conclusion this is a big deal. because if Broward County doesn't get every vote counted, it's, number one, going to be an issue as far as the voters are concerned. They're going to be very upset about it. It's a stronghold for the Democrats and Charlie Crist, but also the fact that the voting machines, and if they have these problems, who knows where this is all going to end up. So our first report tonight out of Florida starts out with very troubling news for the Democrats and a court ask to extend the voting for at least 1 hour. One Democratic operative told me that they were going to try to get 2, but it looks like they're going to ask for 1 hour, and that's what we have at this time. So it looks like it could be a long night here in Florida. You know, this race has had everything, and the money has been absolutely staggering. In the last week, the Crist camp has tried to keep up. They've had some conference calls with fundraisers. They've never seen money like this come over the phone just to try to keep up with what Rick Scott has done in the last week of throwing some $20 million of his own money into this thing.
Ed, I should mention, while you've been talking, we've been showing some of the early results that we've got from Florida. And I should just clarify for our viewers at home that some of the vote is in Florida, but there are still polling places open in the Panhandle. There's a number of states, including Florida, where polling places close at different hours depending on the time zone. So I just want to make that clear. Ed, though, as you're watching the Crist campaign react to what they're worried about in Broward County, file this lawsuit as they're scrambling to make sure that the election is handled the way it's supposed to be handled. Can you just tell us basically what their level of confidence is overall, whether you think that they think they're going to win tonight, whether you can tell if they're just spinning you or if they believe it?
Nobody's talking about a win here, Rachel. Neither side. It is so close. It's razor thin. There's not even a whisper about who might be leading or what is so positive to believe for them to believe that it's going to be a great night at the office. It is so close. But we have seen some turnouts. For instance, in Hillsborough County, there's been a good turnout tonight. Over at Florida University, there was a turnout that they have never seen in midterm elections before. They've already surpassed the 2010 turnout from the data that they have, but they're certainly not going to reach 2012. One thing that has not been focused on very much is that Charlie Crist tapped into the Obama data mining personnel. There's a number of people that were working with the Obama camp that kind of slipped under the radar screen and ended up working with Charlie Crist camp. And so the research that Charlie Crist team has should be spot on. And so the fact that they're not saying anything here early tonight just underscores that they're not out of the woods yet. They're pretty nervous, but the same thing goes for Rick Scott's camp as well. Close to the vest is the way they're calling it right now.
And you must love this stuff. There was a great 7-point plan they did down there in Florida last time in 12 for the president for his re-election, where a friend of mine was working down there, and she said that you would make 7 contacts to each voter, whether it was knocking on the door, leaving a door hanger, or making a phone call, or that morning offering a car ride. And if you put those 7 contacts into each voter, you would get a vote. And so everybody felt they were getting input that led to output. Is it that kind of a machine that they picked up on down there for the governor?
It is. It is exactly that. And it's also a greater door-to-door effort that we've seen in the 3 counties that the Democrats feel like they have to be extremely strong, the ones I mentioned, Dade, Broward, and Palm. Yeah. If they don't get that, I don't know how Charlie Crist can win. You know, Florida's kind of a politically schizophrenic state. You've got a lot of conservatives up north. You've got the middle of the state, which kind of reflects a mixed bag of thinking, kind of Midwestern. And then you've got southern Florida, which really reflects the northeastern portion of the United States. Now, figuring out the model to get those folks together to get out to vote has really been the challenge here. I talked to a lot of African Americans in Broward County when I was down here the last few days. They didn't feel like their young people were as energized as they should have been. And some of the older African Americans were telling me, saying, Ed, we got to get the young kids there. They don't even know what's going on. And so they were a little bit apprehensive about all that. But the data mining people from the Obama team to Charlie Crist really was a brilliant move. So they feel like they got their bases covered. It does come down to the turnout. Let me tell you about the money in this thing. We all know that Rick Scott's very, very wealthy. He's thrown $20 million of his own money into this thing late to try to secure it. Last week, there was a conference call amongst the trial lawyers here in Florida. Now, the trial lawyers have been with Charlie Crist from the beginning and the middle, and now they're trying to close it out for him. There was a call that almost raised close to $1 million. I mean, guys were on that call, and they were forking out their plastic and going $25,000, $40,000, $50,000, and that's the intensity of it. The trial lawyers are fearless. They just want Charlie Crist to win so bad, and they are so afraid of Rick Scott. You know, they've had a Republican governor down here since 2000. Actually, Charlie Crist was one of them for a while, but of course he's changed things quite a bit. But it's been radical on court lawyers for a long time, and they are putting everything they have into this. If they can't win it this time, I don't know when they can.
Ed Schultz in St. Petersburg, Florida, at the Crist campaign headquarters there. Ed, thank you. We'll be checking back in with you. Absolutely. Those polls in Florida close at the top of the hour at 8 o'clock. But when we come back in just a couple of minutes, polls are going to be closing at the bottom of the hour, at the half hour, in North Carolina and in West Virginia and in Ohio. Obviously, all eyes on North Carolina, looking to see if Democratic Senator Kay Hagan can hang on to her seat. This is MSNBC's live coverage on election night. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We're back, and the news keeps coming. The polls are about to close in 3 more states. North Carolina, the all-important state there, Ohio and West Virginia. And the race to watch here, North Carolina, and that Senate race there between incumbent Democrat Kay Hagan, who's fought like hell to hold that seat, and Republican Tom Tillis, who has a few problems of his own. You know, it's an interesting race. We talked about it earlier. This is a race of even Steven. They both have a case to make against the other's record. You know, she's an Obama, too close to Obama for that state. You could argue. He's got a whole history of destroying the education system of the state, which was their pride and glory. I went to grad school down there. Everybody loves Chapel Hill, except Tom Tillis and the Republican legislators. They want to bring it back to the Stone Ages down there. After years and years of building up that state with Duke and NC State, you know, Ed's place, Ed Schultz went there. It's a great university center. The state has come up. Anyway, we're going to see it at 7:30.
The Republican takeover of state government in North Carolina has been on the ballot as much as anything else. But we've got our first results right now. Polls have just closed in North Carolina. At this hour, NBC News is calling this race too close to call between Democrat Kay Hagan, the incumbent, and Republican Tom Tillis. West Virginia Senate race, NBC is projecting the winner, Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican. That is a Republican pickup in the Senate for the Republican Party. In the Georgia Senate race, right now, it's 50% of the expected vote in Georgia between David Perdue, the Republican candidate, and Michelle Nunn, 1% in. David Perdue, the Republican candidate, and Michelle Nunn, the Democratic candidate. That is too early to call. 1% in. Again, there, forgive me. Senate pickups, Republican at this point. It's West Virginia. They have added that to their total. At this point, the Senate, at this hour in the Senate, the Republican total number of seats is 34. The total number of Democratic seats is 32. And there, of course, are 2 independents who, in the past at least, have caucused with the Democratic Party. Right now, NBC News is also projecting the winner in the Ohio governor's race. John Kasich, the incumbent Republican governor of Ohio. This is one of those races where I think Democrats thought they were going to put up a harder fight than they did. But John Kasich has sewed that up, according to NBC News projection. And the governor's race, only 1% of the expected vote in Georgia. Nathan Deal, the Republican incumbent. Jason Carter, the Democrat, is challenging him. NBC is calling this race too early to call at this point.
Well, the great thing about John Kasich, if you're a conservative, a Republican, is that he has sort of the advantages of Rick Santorum without the insanity. He has all the pluses. He's working class. He's been a successful executive. He just won a big re-election. He may well be on the, I mean, maybe you have a thought here, Michael, but I think he's going to get on that list. He and if Scott Walker gets reelected, we don't, that's a big if, of course, against Mary Burke. But I think Kasich is the sweet spot. It's Ohio. Ohio Republicans have to carry Ohio. They're having their convention there in Cleveland. It's just perfect for him. Now, I don't know all the details. And, of course, once you run for president, you stick your head out. All the bad stuff comes out of nowhere. But I think right now he looks very good as a potential running mate. He's got that working class thing going for him, the ethnic thing going for him. I like the guy. I've known him for 30, 40 years. He was a House member forever, a commentator on the Fox News network, if that's not a oxymoron, but just kidding. It's got a great network. Anyway. Here's
what I got to say. You may like John Kasich. I got to say, I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him from Adam. I react to him the way that I see him in politics. And I think the only reason I would disagree with you there is that he did not have a contest in this governor's race. The Democrats thought when they picked
that tells you something.
That's not his fault.
That tells you something.
But it tells you that him winning this race doesn't tell you that he's the almighty conqueror. It just tells you that he ran against Ed Fitzgerald, who imploded as soon as the
Democrats picked him. It told you that nobody wanted to run against him.
It tells you, and that tells you a lot.
Looked like a good
but that tells you a lot in politics when you don't get an opponent in a state like Ohio where the Democrats have been strong.
Sure.
It tells you a lot that Kasich has done his homework, and he's done it well with the voters. And remember when we were focusing on everything that was going on with Scott Walker and Chris Christie? Kasich was being the governor of Ohio, and he was sticking to his business. He was doing what he needed to do and dealing with a lot of the issues that blew up in the face of both Walker and Christie in a very honest way.
He also did a huge tactical readjustment after he got his, shellacked yes. in the referendum, overturning the law that he had passed, like the Wisconsin law. All of a sudden, he shoved Medicaid expansion down the throats of the Republican Party there, doing it in a fairly dubious means procedurally, actually running an end around the legislature. But he understood after that midpoint, that rebuke from the voters, that he was in trouble, that he was running too far to the right of Ohio voters, and he came far back.
Don't be against end arounds, because we got a president coming back in the lame duck, and we don't know what end arounds. Can I bring in Rob Gibbs? He's dying to get in here. Rob?
Well, I think we would both just say Ohio should have been a race. So in 2010, in Rust Belt governorships, right, Democrats lost Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The person that was in the most trouble, if you looked at the vote, should have been John Kasich. He got 49% of the vote. Democrats thought that would be a race 6 months ago, and it's one of these races where we're barely going to touch tonight, but it shows you how much the map has changed a bit. It is a toss-up swing state in a presidential race, and the fact that we're calling the governor's race the moment the polls close is testament to how much better a race that he ran than anybody could have imagined.
Isn't this, though, the one race that's more like 2010 than any other, in the sense that I look at this Ohio governor's race and I see I am not a witch. I think this is the one candidate where you've got a top-of-the-ticket, the one race where you got a top-of-the-ticket candidate on the Democratic side, in this case, Ed Fitzgerald, who really did implode as soon as they picked him. They thought he was going to be a good candidate. It wasn't that they were giving that away to anybody who would be, dumb enough to run against John Kasich. They picked Fitzgerald, and then all of this stuff came out against him, and they just destroyed him with they didn't know before they picked him. This seems to me like the case where Kasich didn't really get tested.
Well, you know who else built their career on their opponents falling apart and blowing up in their faces?
Everybody successful in politics.
Barack Obama, because every one of his opponents just self-destructed in front of him. They immolated on television. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think tonight when we see John Kasich take the stage, we see the beginning of the 2016 presidential campaign. We have a governor reelected who is considered to be vulnerable. So when he takes the stage tonight, he's making an important national debut. How does he carry? Does he have the stature? Does he have the command presence? You're going to have a lot of Republicans around the country in a wide open field getting the first look at John Kasich, successful chief executive, coming off a big and early victory tonight. So be wise for John Kasich, I think, to get out there early tonight, and a lot of people will be taking his measure as a future potential presidential candidate.
And I would say one other state that Steve and I have been talking about is the state of Virginia. Again, a toss-up purple presidential state. Mark Warner got, in 2008, 65% of the vote. He left the governor's mansion in Richmond with an approval rating of somewhere between 75 and 80, and we're sitting on a race that is too close to call, and I think everybody's a bit surprised that this isn't a race that got put away.
Actually, technically it's too early to call. We don't know how close it's going to end up.
No, absolutely. But I do think it speaks that we're looking at the Georgia Senate race right now, and control of the United States Senate could well hinge on whether a Democratic candidate prevails in the state of Georgia. If Virginia is as close as it may turn out to be, a total failure of imagination on the part of the Republican Party, in that Virginia is a must-win state in a presidential campaign, one of the best campaigns run by any Republican in the country, run by Ed Gillespie, but not the overwhelming amount of outside resources put into this race as opposed to some of the other races. And so you look at this map, Democrats continue to expand opportunities, continue to spread the field into red states. They have competitive candidates in those states. A purple state, the Republicans have to win. A great candidate like Ed Gillespie. If this is a close race, this will be something that Republicans regret.
On the Senate races so far, in terms of what we've learned tonight, in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell has been reelected in Kentucky. Polls closed in Georgia at 7 o'clock and in North Carolina at 7:30, both of those Eastern time, right? In Georgia right now, too early to call. In North Carolina, too close to call. We're going to be watching those as results continue to come in. But Steve Kornacki, as you are looking specifically at that Georgia race, again, polls have been closed since 7 o'clock. NBC is calling it too early to call. What do we know so far about Georgia?
Yeah, there's something we're seeing very interesting, and I want to first of all say this is a fluid situation, but we're seeing something interesting in Georgia, and I want to flag it for you. So let's put the results up right now. And as you say, it's very early. We only have sort of scattered precincts in. So right now, pay no attention to the 60-38 Purdue none margin you're seeing there. What we're seeing, though, is in the exit polls. And the exit polls are constantly changing throughout the night. So when I say this is fluid, I really can't stress that enough. However, what the exit polls are telling us at this hour is that the composition of the electorate in Georgia is 64% white and 36% non-white. And if that holds, that is the highest share of the non-white vote you have ever had in Georgia. That is exceeding Democrats' wildest expectations in Georgia. Now, of that, it's also 30% black. That would also be higher. That's what we're seeing right now. Higher than what Democrats had been hoping for. So if you look at it closely at the exit poll, what you're seeing is that among blacks, Michelle Nunn is leading in this exit poll 93-6. That's what she needs. That's why this is too close to call right now. The flip side of that, however, is among whites in this exit poll, she's only getting 27%. So that's why Purdue's very much in this, and that's why it's dead even. And we just show you very quickly what to look for as these results start to come in right now. This is a pretty empty county board right here, but I'm just going to circle. This is the key right now for Democrats. When you see numbers like that, that's Fulton County right there. That's Atlanta. That's DeKalb County. And then this is sort of the heart of the Democratic African-American base in Georgia. And then you got to look at this one right here. This is Henry County. And the story of Henry County is the story of Georgia. In 1996, Henry County was a predominantly white county that voted for Bob Dole by 25 points. By 2012, the black population had grown 400%, and President Obama nearly carried it. Look for what happens there tonight. If the African-American vote is going to carry Michelle Nunn, that's where you're really going to see it. Steve
Kornacki on that too early to call Georgia Senate race. Andrew, were you going to jump in there?
I was just going to jump in on Mitch McConnell and the headwinds that he was fighting against. 52% of the people in the exit polls said that they viewed him unfavorably. But the problem that Allison Grimes had two-thirds viewed President Obama unfavorably. From Kentucky, where we have the result of Mitch McConnell. And regarding Virginia, I was told this afternoon by a Democratic operative that they were seeing some trouble for the Democrat, John Warner. John Warner is a highly regarded...
Mark Warner,
rather. Highly regarded senator. John Warner, the, of course, retired veteran senator there. Mark Warner was the governor, as Gibbs was just pointing out, and he won so handily back in 2008. And this would be just a real setback.
It has been off the radar as a potential race.
One caution is that the Washington suburbs come in late.
But if you live in D.C. with me, we both live not the same house, but we live in D.C.
Breaking news, America.
The ad campaign in Northern Virginia, which is D.C., has been relentless, Andrea. That has been a highly charged, very nasty campaign. Yeah. I do always root for the guy or the person who takes on the impossible, like I do for Allison Grimes, against someone you can't beat, and maybe does beat them. I think this Ed Gillespie guy going on against the unbeatable Mark Warner.
And money taken
Warner
away
could be a
by
fascinating
the National
race.
Party because they thought it was not
he stopped running ads at a point.
He was an island.
Throughout the night, we're going to be checking with MSNBC host and Telemundo anchor Jose Diaz-Balart, who is in Florida tonight. We're waiting on Florida poll closings at the top of the hour. Jose, what are you seeing on the ground today in Florida and in the sort of closing arguments for this all-important Florida governor's race?
It's really tight, Rachel. Good evening. You know, it could be a fan blade thin difference between the two candidates for the governor's race here in Florida. And Ed was talking about the discrepancy that they're seeing in parts of the country and parts of the state, I should say. We've been keeping a very close watch on the Latino vote in Florida. Up to maybe 19% of the vote in Florida could be Latinos. And it's interesting because the I-4 corridor, which is an area which is predominantly more receptive to Democrats, has been apparently coming out to vote in very large numbers. And specifically in the Miami-Dade area, where the Cuban-American vote is, and that's a vote that traditionally votes very solidly Republican, they have been coming out to vote. But they come out early vote on a strong basis normally. And we're seeing that in early votes, Florida is kind of tied right now. So it's really interesting. I really do think it's going to be a very tight and maybe a long race. Let's see what happens with this procedure that they're asking to extend the voting. And Rachel, in about 15 minutes, the polls close in Florida, in the Panhandle, and so we'll see what happens then.
It's fascinating. The share of the Latino vote, 18% in Florida for that governor's race, 15% in Colorado. It's going to be a total wild card.
I hate talking ethnically all this, but it is fascinating to watch what happened with Michelle Nunn. And as Steve, who's the best in the business right now doing this, it's interesting because she has 27% of the white vote. I hate talking. I feel like we're in South Africa, 27% of the white vote. And yet everybody says he needs, or she needs, 30. It's already written down somewhere exactly what your bar is for each community. I mean, it's pretty awful. Anyway, coming up now, we've got a real... I love incumbents because they're there and they're going to stay there for a while. United States Senator Joe Manchin is a Democrat from West Virginia. Senator, thank you for coming on. You must be... there we have a legacy candidate elected, of course. Capito's the daughter of Arch Moore, the Republican governor. A lot of dynasty stuff going around for better or worse tonight. Let me ask you about your state. That was the state that Jack Kennedy won. Everybody talked about him winning there, the Roman Catholic winning in that state, which is largely Protestant. Conceded always as a sort of blue-collar, hard-knocks Democrat state. Is it coal? Right. Is it guns? Is it culture? What has moved West Virginia into the center-right or right position politically?
Chris, I think it's all the above that you've mentioned, but mostly important is the jobs. We have good jobs here. We have a lot of good opportunities. We provide the energy this country has needed. West Virginia is a hard-working lot of people, and they're very patriotic. And seeing the government or perception of the government attacking them, which basically is what's happened, they've lost a lot of these good jobs. Coal's going to be used around the world. It's needed in this country, and we can do it better and cleaner than anybody else. But they believe that the president has doubled down on them, and government, I've always told them, government should be your partner and your friend.
Do you think that hurt Allison Grimes? Let's talk Turkey. Do you think that hurt her in the campaign?
Absolutely. And you look at the coal, no matter what she says, in the coal country and people that have seen basically firsthand, they're losing jobs. They're losing their economy. And it's an ancillary thing. There's the value-added jobs all the way down the line. And these people are losing their communities. And it's just devastating. And then you see the utility company saying, we need more of a portfolio that's more reliable, that we can provide the energy this country needs. So, it just doesn't make sense that we have to fight so hard against our own government and our own administration and our own president to try to find a balance. And that's all we're looking for. We're not asking for favors. Just let us do the job we've always done for America. West Virginia will do it.
Senator Manchin, now you're going to have a Republican colleague in the Senate. We still don't know if the Republicans are going to have majority control of the Senate. But when you look ahead toward working with the new home state colleague, Shelley Moore Capito, who is going to be on the other side of the aisle, do you feel like you have more overlap with her than differences with her when it comes to substantive policy that affects your state? Do you anticipate that you two might be able to work together across the aisle more closely than people might expect from the two parties?
I think so, because in West Virginia, they expect us to work together. They don't look at the party affiliation and says, oh, you're a Republican, so you're not supposed to work with the Democrats, or vice versa. You're now going there to represent West Virginia. We expect you to do the best for our state. When I was governor, we brought people together, Democrats and Republicans. We looked at our values and who we are as a people, and we voted that way. And then we'd have fun with our politics, but our state, we took our state very serious, and the same thing with our country. We've got to come together. The people are speaking loud and clear. They don't like what they've seen. I don't like what I've been involved with the last 4 years, and I've been very vocal about that, Andrea, and we've got to change. So whether the Republicans take control, whether we stay in control, then it's got to change no matter who's in control, because we can't continue down the path because nothing gets done. People don't have confidence that we can govern ourselves. And when they lose confidence, basically you see what's happened. Our growth has been lethargic. Our economy should be booming right now. And
you know what?
When they have confidence that we can govern, it'll work.
I like that. Both of you, come on, you and your new colleague from West Virginia, come on hardball some night and cook some deals right on the air. I want to see the deal making. I want to see you guys start it together on issues like growth and things like that. Thank you so much. It's always great having you on. Joe Manchin of West Virginia.
One thing you can...
What can I do?
You can stir the pot, that's for sure. Chris,
I will play Barbara Walters or Walter Cronkite. I will bring you two warring partners together. Anyway, up next. Thank you, Governor.
Absolutely.
Former Governor, thank you. More highlights from what you, the voters, are thinking about tonight as you cast your ballot. It's always good to hear from the people in words, not just votes. Plus, Chuck Todd's coming with us. This is MSNBC's live coverage on election night. Back after this.
This is a very exciting part of the night so far in terms of what we know in the Senate. The big news, of course, is in Kentucky. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican there in Kentucky, has been reelected. In North Carolina right now, the Senate race there, NBC is calling it too close to call. In Georgia, that Senate race there, NBC is calling it too early to call. In Virginia, interestingly right now, NBC calling that race too early to call with about 19% of the expected vote in Virginia. But in terms of what voters are thinking about tonight, who's turning out and why, Tamron Hall's tracking our exit polls. She joins us now. Hi, Tamron.
Hey there, Rachel. In our exit poll, we've asked voters their opinions on a number of key social issues. First up, same-sex marriage. Let's take a look at what we've seen in these numbers right now. Of course, same-sex marriage is legal in 32 states and the District of Columbia. But look at 2014 here. 49% of voters say that same-sex marriage should be legalized in their state. That is up, by the way, 8 points from the past 4 years. But let's take a look at the jump amongst young voters here. This number is pretty interesting here. Under 30 crowd, 2010, 52%. Under 30 crowd, 2014, 66% say same-sex marriage should be legal. Turning now, though, to the legalization of marijuana, already passed in Colorado and Washington states, and on the ballot today in Oregon and in Alaska. In our survey, you see here, 49% believe that marijuana should be legalized, 47% saying it should not. On this, though, pretty divided when you look at the parties. Let's break it down here, and you will see 61% of Democrats say that marijuana should be legal. Looking over on the Republican side, 66% oppose such a move. And lastly, views have not shifted much when it comes to abortion in this country. In fact, 53% believe that abortion should be legal in most cases. 43% say it should be mostly or entirely illegal. So that's a glimpse of our exit poll when it comes to those key social issues I know you guys have been talking about in studio, Rachel.
That's fascinating. It's finally, looking at the pot numbers, you finally get a policy issue on which there is actually a clean partisan divide. Usually clean partisan divides are all culture and who you hate and who you love and what kind of music you listen to and all this other nonsense stuff. Finally, a policy issue on which we actually have a Democratic and Republican position. Chuck Todd is back with us now, as well as Andrea Mitchell, our friends from NBC News. Chuck, looking at North Carolina and Virginia, in particular in these Senate races, just looking at the latest numbers as they come in, both Georgia and North Carolina, Georgia too early, North Carolina too close. What do we know there?
Well, we got a little more exit data in, we've got a little more modeling data in, and it looks a little bit better for Hagan. It looks like perhaps the initial exit poll showed 21% African-American, that the electorate was 21% African-American. It looks like it's going to be a little bit higher than that. Anything higher than that, that is good for her. Plus, you start looking at some of the county-by-county data, and again, Hagan looks, it's still too close to call. You can't say anything, but it's sort of pinky on the scale for her.
Okay.
And then quickly on Virginia, we're watching all that come in. The models are starting to show, as we're watching the raw data come in, the models are starting to show Warner's the favorite here. Warner's still the favorite. We call them the favorite. Clearly, things tightened up. But, you know, our models indicate that this Warner should, depending on, unless there's a collapse in Northern Virginia, he should be fine at the end of the day.
About 20% of that vote in. Still too early to call in Virginia, the official call at this point.
That's a really interesting race, as we were saying, because you've got two very prominent people in the party, and Ed Gillespie, so well known as Republican chair, as a George W. Bush aide.
He ran out of money.
He's going to
ran out of
right.
money and he made that close. I think it really does tell you, though, a little bit of a depressed Democratic turnout in Virginia.
Maybe in part because they thought it was cooked.
Correct. Yeah. That happens sometimes.
I think he'll beat the spread. Gillespie, and he'll go on to run for governor and catch up with his friend McCollum.
I think a guy named Mark Warner pulled that same trick in 1996.
That's what you do. You run once.
Wasn't so bad for him.
Once for range, once for effect. Anyway, when we come back, polls will be closed in some key states coming up in a couple minutes now, including two big governor's races, the race in Florida between Rick Scott and Charlie Crist, plus a race that could make history in my home state of Pennsylvania. We may have the first governor in history bumped out of office, and that's going to be big news when our coverage continues. Well, it's nearly 8 o'clock Eastern, and polls are about to close in 6 states, right? 16
states.
Including New Hampshire, where there's a very tight Senate race, of course, between Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent, and Scott Brown, who was recently, for a time, the senator from Massachusetts. Plus, two big governor's races in Florida, where former Governor Charlie Crist is challenging Republican Rick Scott. And, of course, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, where voters are about to dump their governor for the first time in history. You know,
Pennsylvania has a long history, too.
Well, actually, it's not as long as I made it sound. Governors were allowed to start running for re-election in Milton Schaaf could run in 74 for re-election. They had a long period of just one-term governorships, and then they allowed him to run. This is 40 years, however. First time somebody's been dumped. There was a strong tradition of serving 2 terms. It's hard to tell exactly why Tom Corbett became immensely unpopular, but I think one part of it is he cut education, and that was a big mistake.
At this point, it is 8 o'clock right now on the East Coast, and NBC News can project that the Republican Party has maintained control of the House of Representatives. This is not a characterization of any one individual race. This tells you the overall control in the House right now. Out of 435 seats, the NBC News projection, plus or minus 8 seats, is that Republicans will control 242 seats. Democrats will control 193. So single-digit losses for the Democrats in terms of what's being projected right now by NBC News.
Well, there's always the problem that, we always hope that a new president, and if it's Hillary Clinton next time around, we'd like to see, if she wins, to come in with a mandate. Most people would say better to govern than not being able to govern. That's an objective statement. And one of the goals of the Republican campaign committee this time was to build up enough padding so that even if she won the nomination next time, even if she came in with a decent majority, that she would not bring the House with her and wouldn't be able to govern. This is an amazingly negative goal, by the way. To basically say, let's undermine her before she gets in there.
But it's the substance.
But I think we're going to see if they get up to 240 or something like that tonight, or 245, where their real goal was, it's going to be real trouble for her. But I think, as it was argued earlier by Steve Israel, they still have a potential to win it all back in 2 years.
In terms of what just happened in all the states, these 16 states where polls have just closed, let me tell you what we know first in terms of the Senate, and then we'll get to the governors. First one, all eyes on this race. Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire against Scott Brown. NBC's characterization of this race is too early to call at this point, just 9% of the expected vote in. In New Jersey, the Senate race there, Cory Booker, the Democratic incumbent, is projected as the winner by NBC News, as is Massachusetts Democratic incumbent Ed Markey will be returning to the Senate, according to NBC News projections. In Mississippi, Thad Cochran had a heck of a fight in the Republican primary, but he is the projected winner tonight. NBC News projecting that Thad Cochran has been reelected, as has Republican incumbent Susan Collins in the great state of Maine. From a long way out, it looked like she might have a fight on this one, but as it got closer, it was hers to lose, and she did not. Illinois Senate candidate Dick Durbin, of course, reelected Democratic incumbent there. He's the projected winner, according to NBC News projections. In Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, the Republican incumbent, is projected to hold on to his seat in Tennessee. Now, in the great state of Oklahoma, we've actually got both Senate seats up. Jim Inhofe was up at the end of his most recent full term in the Senate. He's projected to hold on to his seat. And in the Oklahoma Senate special election, James Lankford is the projected winner in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, one of 2 states tonight that has both Senate seats on the line. In Rhode Island, the Democratic incumbent Jack Reed is projected to be the winner by NBC News. In the state of Alabama, the Senate race there, Republican incumbent Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III is projected by NBC News to be holding on to his seat. And in the state of Delaware, Chris Coons, who had such an interesting race not long ago in that race in 2010. Christopher Coons, the incumbent, the projected winner by NBC News. Now, in the North Carolina Senate race, there's a few Senate races that we are still watching. There's 13% of the expected vote in thus far in South Carolina. Kay Hagan versus Tom Tillis. You see how close that is. That is being described as too close to call by NBC News projections. In Georgia, in that Senate race, we've only got 3% of the expected vote in. David Perdue, the Republican, versus Michelle Nunn, the Democrat. That is too early to call, according to NBC News. And interestingly, this turned out to be a fascinating one to watch. Virginia Senate, 34% in, so just over a third of the vote in. NBC calling Ed Gillespie versus Mark Warner too early to call in the state of Virginia. In terms of the overall look in the Senate pickup so far, there has been one definite Republican pickup in the state of West Virginia. The overall Senate chamber right now looks like this. 40 Republican seats, 37 Democratic seats, and two independents who have caucused with Democrats in the past. Bernie Sanders most certainly will continue to do that in the future. Angus King might get interesting depending on what else happens over the course of the night. Now let's look at what's going on in terms of the governor's races. In Pennsylvania, the projected winner, NBC News projecting that Tom Corbett has lost his seat. The Democrat challenger, Tom Wolf, will be the new governor of Pennsylvania, according to NBC News projections. Before I go on, I actually have to get your reaction to that, Chris Matthews.
A very interesting candidate, entrepreneur, creates jobs, meets the paycheck, takes care of, meets the payroll. Not a Philadelphian, somewhere for the middle part of the state. Very unusual challenge. They're used to running against ethnics in big cities like Ed Rendell or someone like that. This guy came out of nowhere. This guy beat Allison Schwartz, who was a strong candidate in the primaries. He spent $10 million of his own money in the primaries.
Was Schwartz the establishment candidate? That's how it felt like.
Well, it's hard because she didn't really have the big city machine behind her. She did. She had Bob Brady behind her, but she was a suburbanite mainly. She was part of Montgomery County, part of Northeast Philly, where I grew up. She never really had the sort of the sweep of support across the city. She thought, you know what she didn't do right? A very attractive candidate if she'd gone on television. She never did any television. She never ran.
I want to very quickly, Emily's List, talking to people there, they have really struggled getting their donors fired up about electing women governors. This has been a big challenge for Emily's List, by the way. They had a hard time rallying people for Allison Schwartz. They've had a hard time rallying people for Martha Coakley. Mary Burke was able to, in Wisconsin, was able to get some money raised because of Scott Walker as somebody that's popular to give money against inside the Democratic donor community. But Emily's List, which of course they can raise money for Senate candidates, but it's been a real frustration for them that they have not been able to make more inroads here, because you take Hillary Clinton away, the best place to move women into the presidential field is via governorships.
Let's look at some of those.
Done it with Nikki Haley and Susanna Martinez.
Sure,
Republicans are farther ahead of
absolutely
this.
bulletproof.
I think I know
heading
why.
into this. Let's look at some of what else we've just got in terms of poll closings at 8 o'clock with these governor's boards. This is the Florida governor's race that we've been watching so intensely. Look at that, 2/3 of the vote in, 2/3 of the expected vote in Florida. NBC News is calling Charlie Crist versus Rick Scott in Florida too close to call. Look at how tight that difference is between those two candidates with that much of the vote already in. This is going to be amazing to watch unfold in Florida tonight. In Illinois, the governor's race there being characterized by NBC News as too close to call. Pat Quinn, the Democratic incumbent there, facing Bruce Rauner, the Republican. Massachusetts governor's race. This one's very close to my heart. Martha Coakley, the Democrat. Charlie Baker, the Republican. Too close to call, according to NBC News projections at this point. In Maine, the governor's race, the fascinating, almost maybe a three-way race there. Paul LePage, the Republican incumbent, facing off against Elliot Cutler, the independent again, who kind of, sort of, didn't really maybe drop out of the race last week, but still has his name on the ballot. Mike Michaud, the Democrat, facing the Democrat on the ballot there. At this point, too close to call. We've got almost none of the vote in, or in fact, none of the vote in Maine. That'll be an interesting one to watch. Connecticut Governor Dan Malloy and Tom Foley, a rematch for them. Democratic incumbent Dan Malloy here. This one's being called too early to call. Tom Foley and Dan Malloy fought it out very close in 2010. It looks like they will again tonight. In Alabama, NBC can project that the winner of that governor's race will be Robert Bentley, the incumbent Republican governor in Alabama. In Tennessee, the incumbent Republican governor there, Bill Haslam, is the projected winner, according to NBC News. In Maryland, the governor's race there is too early to call. The Democratic candidate there is Anthony Brown. Larry Hogan, the Republican, too early to call in the state of Maryland. That's been an interesting one to watch. In New Hampshire, also too early to call. This is the incumbent Democrat, Maggie Hassan, against Walt Havenstein, the Republican there. We've only just got about 10% of that vote in thus far. Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo is the Democrat in this race. Ellen Fung, the Republican in this race. This is being called too early to call. She'd be the first woman governor of Rhode Island. He'd be the first Asian American governor of Rhode Island. They'll make history either way there. In Oklahoma, it's Joe Dorman, the Democrat, facing off against the incumbent Republican Mary Fallin. This one is too early to call in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, obviously a deep red state. In the Georgia governor's race, just 4% of the vote in thus far. Look at that. Too early to call in Georgia governor. Nathan Deal, the Republican incumbent, facing off against 39-year-old Jason Carter, his Democratic challenger. God, there's so much going on tonight that is unknowable at this point. This is amazing. This is amazing.
There's never. I heard one of the veterans around here who's been around watching these elections for decades said he has never seen so many close elections. That there's just so many. What is going on in the country? Every election has to come down to too early, too close,
but there's
and then it's everywhere.
Anti-status quo this year, number one, but the two parties, via money and mechanics, have never been more evenly matched. Okay, this is sort of, think of it as the Cold War in the 60s and 70s between the Soviets and America. I mean, it's mutually assured destruction financially now. They both found their billionaires this time. Remember, 2010, Republicans did all the outside money. Democrats really never did because President Obama wasn't sure where he stood on that. Remember, and then that's been reversed. So that's why these are all right. Every competitive race is evenly matched financially, ground game, you name it. So guess what? You have close races.
And what really strikes me is that people say in the exit polls the issue that drives people most is the economy. Neither side, in most of these races, candidates didn't talk about the economy. It was all attack ads. Right. All this money was just pouring more fuel, more kerosene on the fire and making people hate the process even more.
Right? And yet there's been a Democratic call to the cavalry, which they used to call the base. And now it's the cavalry, the African-American vote. Well, and if there's a victory in North Carolina tonight, that's what it's going to be about.
Well, I think there's already a victory in Pennsylvania. You've got to remember that not only two things that Corbett became a symbol of, cutting education, where labor went in heavy, and he signed one of the worst voter ID laws in the country. Right. And I spent some time in Pennsylvania. They were mobilizing black churches and all a lot. So Corbett's defeat is a big plus for the labor and civil rights community. I think that if Christ is successful, I spent a lot of time there this last week, the same thing there, and of course North Carolina. So I'm watching those states. We're seeing in Georgia that blacks are coming out in larger numbers than they thought. We don't know what's going to happen yet, but the reason that none is competitive is there's a large black vote. And I think that clearly a lot of us that have been on the field just dealing with turnout and saying don't let voters ID and ending some of the early voting days are feeling that this is good because we are exceeding numbers in Georgia, and it looks like a real impact.
Let me just interject for a second. We have had a change in one call. It's not conclusive, but in Virginia, we were calling it too early to call. Virginia is now too close to call. Virginia, the Senate race between Ed Gillespie and Mark Warner, 36% of the vote in right now. NBC just changed that to a too close to call.
You know what? It struck me, because I know this voter suppression thing's been going on. It's terrible. Right. I mean, it's just cheating is what it is. But you know what? Aren't you amazed that the Republican leader of the legislature in Pennsylvania and the party leader, Gleason, came out and said on television, we're doing this to screw the black voter. They just said it.
Which is why tonight Corbett's defeat is very much of interest to somebody like me, because now they faced, in many ways, I think they went in so blatant that they incurred a backlash, and the mobilization that I saw when I was there, and you and I would say a blacklash has begun.
I would go with that. But Philly's a good town to do that, too. They got an attitude there. They'll show an attitude when you do that.
Philly has enough attitude to export it.
As long as they vote, they
and we do. Exactly. We've all lived there. We all know how it works. Let's go to Steve Kornacki here for a second on this call that just changed in Virginia. This is the Senate race in Virginia. Again, it was too early to call. It's now become too close to call. Steve, what do we know is going on here?
Yeah, so let's take a look. And as you can see in the returns that we have right now, Gillespie, the Republican, continues to lead Warner. The thing to keep in mind is the return pattern in Virginia is a little funny, and I want to show you what that means. Let's take a close look at the counties in Virginia right here. And a couple things to keep an eye on. One is, look, right outside of Washington, D.C., in the northern part of the state, this is Fairfax County. This is the most populous county in Virginia. There are 1 million people, more than 1 million people in Fairfax County. This is a strong Democratic county. It usually takes a long time to come in. So you see, only 7% of the vote right there. You can see in Fairfax County. So this is sort of the heart of Mark Warner's base. You're not seeing many numbers here, and you might not see them for a while. So keep an eye on that. Also keep an eye down the city of Richmond, another Democratic bastion. There's only about 10% of the vote in right now. So if you think back to the 2012 presidential election, for most of the night, if you were looking at the returns in Virginia, you saw Mitt Romney with a stubborn lead over Barack Obama. And some of these counties came in very late and pushed Barack Obama over the top. And just one more to keep an eye on here, I think sort of a swing county in Virginia, Prince William County, again, outside Washington, D.C. The last time there was a competitive Senate election in Virginia in a midterm. So back in 2006, when George Allen lost his seat to Jim Webb, this county basically mirrored the statewide result. So keep an eye here. Again, only 4% in right now, so tough to say much from that, but keep an eye there as well.
Well, joining us right now is U.S. Congresswoman Donna Edwards, a familiar face on this network. Thank you, Congresswoman. You know, we're talking about I hate to do this, but we're going to do it. We're going to do the African-American vote, and I call them the cavalry because usually they're assumed to be the base. This time they've been called in an emergency sort of effort by a party that's a bit not complacent, but down, I think, emotionally down. The white voter, who's a Democrat, seems to be down. And they're saying, well, wait a minute, let's get the people who care most about this president historically. Will you explain it in your terms? Why is the African-American vote the one who's been called as almost like the emergency force to save the Democratic bacon in so many states?
Look, the African-American vote is a core vote of the Democratic Party. That is not a surprise. And I think if you look across the country, even in districts where and states where there's a small percentage of African-American vote, they're being called to arms, and they're standing up. They heard the president's call. They understand the importance of this president and standing up for this president, and they were prepared to come out and vote. And frankly, they're voting their interest. We're all voting our interest in these races, whether they're in Georgia or Maryland or out in Nebraska, where I was just a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm not surprised, and it really is because the African-American vote is a core part of our Democratic coalition.
What do you make of the way the president addressed your community, doing it sort of under the radar, not big national television speeches, but saying, I'll do black radio? You know, in other words, it's almost like telegraphing without offending the white conservative voter. What did you think of the way he sort of did this under the radar?
Well, I actually appreciate it. He came to voters where we are. We're on black radio. We're in ethnic newspapers and our community-based papers. He came to our communities where our communities are, and he spoke to us in a language that we understand and with a message that we want to deliver for the American people, saying we want to stand up for wages and income disparities and health care. And he knows, and the African-American voters know, that unless he has a Congress that's willing to work with him, it makes it really difficult for the president to succeed.
Congresswoman Donna Edwards, in Maryland right now, I'm just looking at the governor's returns. We've only got about 3% of the expected vote in thus far. But the NBC characterization of that Maryland governor's race is that it is too early to call between the Democrat Anthony Brown and the Republican Larry Hogan. At this point, we don't have very much of the vote in. But while we're looking at this, what's the best hope for Anthony Brown here? And why have the Republicans been able to keep this race within reaching distance?
Well, what I know about Maryland is that probably what you have in is coming from Western Maryland and from some more rural parts of the state, so it's not a surprise that it's too close and early right now. But when the Washington suburbs are delivered, when my congressional district is delivered, when Baltimore is delivered, it's going to deliver a vote for Anthony Brown.
Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland, thanks for being with us. It's going to be a long and fun night. Thanks for being here.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, coming up, a look. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got, we're going to go. I'm sorry. I was going to take us to a commercial, but much better. We're actually going to be going to Kentucky, where Allison Lundergan Grimes is going to be giving a speech. She lost tonight to Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell. Let's go live.
Thank you all very, very much. Well, good evening. Good evening. 16 months ago, we began a journey to send a message that Washington just isn't working for Kentucky, that we want to actually put the people of this state first instead of partisan politics. Along that journey, we showed this nation what the Commonwealth is truly capable of, breaking records here in this state with our fundraising, leading the nation with our work to build a grassroots organization unlike any the Commonwealth has ever seen, with over 50 offices, 6,000 volunteers, and momentum from Pikeville to Paducah to northern Kentucky. This was made possible. This was made possible because of an amazing husband, an amazing family, my fellow constitutional officers, Governor Beshear, Governor Collins, Governor Brown, Governor Jones, Governor Patton, and importantly, a dedicated staff, and each and every one of you. While tonight didn't bring us the result that we had hoped for, this journey, the fight for you, it was worth it. I will continue to fight for the Commonwealth of Kentucky each and every day. My hope is the message has been sent to Congress that we need to work to increase the minimum wage, to close the gender pay gap, and to bring good-paying jobs back to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This journey, this fight was for each and every one of you, and I will work my hardest to keep this amazing organization that we have built together intact, to fight for a brighter and better future. We deserve that. I want to thank the hundreds of thousands of Kentuckians that made it out to vote today. You had your voice heard. That is what democracy is all about. To each and every one of you that cast a ballot in this election, I will continue to work for you, and together we will rebuild a brighter future for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you all very, very much.
Alison Lundgren Grimes making her concession speech tonight. At the poll close, NBC News did project right away that Kentucky still had an eerie confidence all along, even as the rest of the country called this a race to watch. But this went right at the poll closing.
That wasn't your usual concession speech. Usually you congratulate the winner. You say something gracious. You move on. You unify the state to some extent. It was a partisan speech. Fair enough. It's her call. But it was unusual.
Well, it wasn't a concession speech. Usually you concede in a concession. I mean, I think that again, you need to be gracious. You can represent what you represent, but you respect the winner, and you pledge to move on together and let him look like the one obstinate. But the other thing, I think the beginning of the end for her was when she could not say she had voted for President Obama. And it was just not the Obama voter that turned on her. You look like you lack authenticity. And she furthered that tonight by not being gracious to Senator McConnell, one who I disagree with. But you don't act in that way. I don't think that
I think she just looked shell-shocked. I don't think she expected to get beat that bad.
Yeah, I don't think that they did either. And, you know, I think it's also a reflection of just how nasty this race has been and how hard. I mean, if you talk to people who've tried to run against Mitch McConnell in the past, they all describe it as sort of a pummeling experience. I mean, we forget how many millions of dollars were put on the airwaves, both through the super PAC supporting McConnell, but also with C4. There was a lot of dark money. A lot of people didn't notice that till the end. She really took a drubbing here.
And we were just down in Harlan County in coal country in eastern Kentucky a month and a half ago. And the fact of the matter is, McConnell's strategy to tire to Barack Obama was the correct political strategy, and he had it from day one, and he never wavered. And her her unable to say that she voted for Barack Obama was because Barack Obama is deeply unpopular.
But you've got to have an answer other than humana, humana, humana.
Oh,
I know you're going to get
100% agree.
You could be a little. No, I'm not going to do it. I was going to say something. Okay, I'll say it.
Okay.
She was unable to say who won the election either. I mean, look, that was a written speech. It was on the prompter. She should have said, she'll get around to it, I think. I would recommend that the Secretary of State out there do that. I think you should concede and also congratulate the winner, because it is a fair election. There wasn't any cheating in the election. You have to observe certain protocols in American politics. Just do it, get it over with. You don't have to like the guy.
There's a next step to what happens to Mitch McConnell tonight. It was now he's waiting to find out if he's not just going to be minority leader, if he is going to me, majority leader of the Senate.
Sure.
But we're told, this is interesting, that he is going to speak momentarily, which means he's not going to wait to find out if he's majority leader before he gives his speech. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll, I think, be right back with Mitch McConnell's remarks. Stay with us.
Apparently decided this a while ago. Joining us right now is Georgia Republican Congressman Jack Kingston. Congressman, thank you for coming on. You know, you'll be our in-house spotter right now. And tell us about Republican control for 2 more years. Is it your hunch they're going to go to probes and more Darrell Issa stuff? Or maybe have a sit-down with the president, figure what can you do on trade? What can you do on, infrastructure? What you can do on tax reform? There are areas, they don't agree on much, but there are areas where they can agree on a growth agenda for the country. I think both sides believe in economic growth. Okay. I'm sorry, we have to hold off for you. Let's go to Senator McConnell.
They've put their trust and confidence in me for a long time, and I want to thank them tonight. I work hard to bring your concerns to Washington, and I will not let up. You know, every election is a job interview. In this case, a very long one. I shared my vision with you. You shared your stories and your concerns with me. And yet one complaint has stood out above all the rest, especially in recent weeks. So I'd like to make an announcement that I think will be very welcome news to many of you. No more campaign commercials. The TV executives may not like it, but enough is enough, right? A little while ago, I spoke with my opponent. Secretary Grimes ran a spirited campaign. She earned a lot of votes, and she earned my respect. It took a lot of guts to take on a race like this. Because of the business we're in, it also meant she'd take some heat. I admire her willingness to step into the arena and fight as hard as she did. We need more people who are willing to do that, not fewer. She deserves a lot of credit for it. This was certainly a hard-fought contest. And I've been so proud to have my wife beside me every step of the way. You know, Elaine told me early on she wasn't ready to have me sitting around the house working on my resume. And she's gone above and beyond to prevent that. She's been the most valuable player on our team, and I'm so blessed to have her in my life and by my side. And to my campaign manager, Josh Holmes, my friends, he pitched a perfect game. Thank you, Josh. Of course, there's so many others.
I'm sorry to interrupt here just for a moment, but we have just had polls close in the state of Arkansas, and we do have 2 calls to make. In the Arkansas Senate race, NBC News can project that the winner of the Arkansas Senate race is Tom Cotton. This is a Republican gain. Democratic incumbent Mark Pryor losing his Senate seat in Arkansas to Congressman Tom Cotton. NBC News also in Arkansas can project at this hour that the winner of the Arkansas governor's race is Asa Hutchinson, Republican congressman who's run for statewide office in Arkansas. That is also a pickup at the Senate level. Now back to Mitch McConnell and his victory speech in Kentucky.
Around the world. From my mom, I learned the value of perseverance and got an enduring lesson as she helped me overcome a frightening bout with polio as a child. In many ways, my folks were just like any other parents of their generation. They were optimists. They believed in America. Without a trace of cynicism, they transmitted the central promise of this country on to me, the promise that every generation will leave the next one a little better off than the one before. This is the compact that every generation of Americans has made with the one that followed it. And through civil war and depressions and world wars and strife, we've always made good on it. But as I've traveled through Kentucky over the past year, I've sensed new doubts. Suddenly, folks aren't so sure that that compact will survive if we continue down the road that we've been on. They're hungry for new leadership. They want a reason to be hopeful. Above all, they want some reassurance that people who run the government are actually on their side. So tonight, I pledge you this. Whether you're a coal miner in eastern Kentucky who can't find work, or a mom in Paducah who doesn't understand why the government just took away her family's health insurance, I've heard your concerns. I've made them my own. You will be heard in Washington. And look, when you get right down to it, that's what this campaign was really all about. It wasn't about me or my opponent. It was about a government that people no longer trust to carry out its most basic duties, to keep them safe, to protect the border, to provide dignified and quality care for our veterans. A government that can't be trusted to do the basic things because it's too busy focusing on things it shouldn't be focused on at all. A government that's too busy imposing its view of the world on people who don't share that view. Too many in Washington have forgotten that their job is to serve. So tomorrow, the papers will say, I won this race. But the truth is, tonight we begin another one that's far more important than mine. And that's the race to turn this country around. To restore hope and confidence and optimism to this Commonwealth and across this nation of ours. Some things don't change after tonight. I don't expect the president to wake up tomorrow and view the world any differently than he did when he woke up this morning. He knows I won't either. But look, we do have an obligation to work together on issues where we can agree. I think we have a duty to do that. Just because we have a two-party system doesn't mean we have to be in perpetual conflict. I think I've shown that to be true at critical times in the past. I hope the president gives me the chance to show it again. There's so much that we can and should do for the good of all Americans. Kentuckians are tired of a government that only seems to work when it is working against them. And they're also tired of hearing that those of us who fight for them in Washington are somehow the problem. I'm so honored to have Dr. Noel Hunter with me tonight. You've all gotten an opportunity to get to know her. What an extraordinary woman. Dr. Hunter was determined to get her daughter back. Against all odds, she did it. She did it. And when all was said and done, she achieved something else that a lot of people said was even more remarkable. She made me seem more warm and cuddly.
Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the United States Senate, with his charm turned up to stun, giving his victory speech tonight after he defeated Allison Lundergan Grimes in that Kentucky Senate race. A lot of people talking about him as being an unpersonable and unintelligent guy. That was Mitch McConnell at his best. In terms of the way that he presents himself to the public. Just to briefly summarize where we're at right now, Republican Mitch McConnell holding on to his seat in Kentucky is, of course, huge news. Democrat Mark Pryor in Arkansas just moments ago losing his Senate seat, also very big news. Right now, in terms of the races that have not yet been called, North Carolina and Virginia Senate races, both are considered too close to call by NBC News. And the New Hampshire and Georgia Senate races are both considered too early to call. So we're keeping an eye on that. A lot of moving pieces still happening right now in the United States Senate, and that's even before you get to the governor's races.
Yeah, I just want to say about Mitch McConnell, he's an exemplar of the fact that politics is a profession. And whatever you think of him, he knows how the game is played. He plays it professionally. He gave a very good victory speech there. He said very good things about his opponent. It was a rough campaign, but he gave her respect. He said, she has grown in my respect. He said all the right. He knows how to do this thing. And it's called politics, and it is a profession. It is not for amateurs. And when somebody loses, they better come back as more professional. Let's go to Jack Kingston, who went through a tough primary fight this year down in Georgia. Congressman, thank you for joining us, as always. And I want to ask you about the House. Now that your party's been projected to win control again next year, what does that mean to the American people? I listened to Mitch there, the Senate Majority Leader, probably, possibly, plausibly. And he was basically saying, I'm going to stay at odds with the president, but we will find areas of common ground. Give us hope tonight. What are the areas of common ground between the conservatives who are apparently going to dominate Congress next year and this center-left president? Some people might say left, I say center-left president. What do they have in common?
You know, Chris, I think they both want jobs. They both want a strong national security. And we can debate, you know, how do you do it? Which regulations do you change? How do you tweak one thing or the other? Do you repeal Obamacare, or do you just go into part of the pricing mechanism for it? Or, you know, what are the right balances? But I can say that under the banner of jobs and national security, there will be things accomplished. If you think back of Clinton losing both the House and the Senate, and Newt Gingrich coming together with Bill Clinton and saying, you know, remember, he famously said in his State of the Union, the era of big government is over, which was a way to hold out, I think, an olive branch. And I think that both sides could probably take a step in the right direction, and we can get some things done.
What will your party give?
You know, I was reading a comment by Rob Portman, and he said if we could get the Keystone Pipeline, maybe we can do something on carbon tax credits. Now, I don't know what he really meant by that, but it was a step to say we can find something that the Democrats want in exchange for something that we need. But I think the overwhelming theme has to be, well, what's best for America? And so, you know, but again, we have been here before. I think what the presumed majority leader of the Senate, Mr. McConnell, was just saying was a majority leader's type speech. As you said, I'm going to keep my philosophical bearings, but there will be things that we can get together on, and I think the American people will be ready for that.
Okay, thank you, Congressman Jack Kingston. He's been on the program and be on again. Thanks so much for joining us from Georgia.
I'm sorry to jump in here for a second, but we do have another call to make in an important governor's race. This has been a fascinating one to watch in New Hampshire. New Hampshire not only has a very tight Senate race, this governor's race was fascinating to watch, but NBC News is now projecting that Governor Maggie Hassan, the Democratic incumbent in New Hampshire, has held on to her seat there. We saw multiple trips there, trips up to New Hampshire by the Republican Governors Association Chair Chris Christie, both trying to boost the prospects for Walt Havenstein, but also, of course, I think because at this time in his life he likes going to New Hampshire. At this point, the New Hampshire Senate race, according to NBC News projections, is too early to call, even with that governor's race in New Hampshire being called. We're going to be back in just a moment with more news on New Hampshire and that key Senate race, and we'll be joined by NBC News' Tom Brokaw. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Just moments ago, we have had a call in the New Hampshire governor's race. This was one to watch. New Hampshire's Democratic incumbent governor, Maggie Hassan, has been reelected in the state of New Hampshire. Now, that does not mean things are settled in New Hampshire. There's House races to watch there, but also a very important United States Senate race. Jeanne Shaheen, the Democratic incumbent, facing off against Scott Brown, who is the Republican challenger, who is also himself a former senator from the neighboring state of Massachusetts. Let's bring in Steve Kornacki to talk about what's going on there in New Hampshire. Hampshire. What do we know about that thus far? It's being called too early to call right now by NBC News.
Yeah, and as we said at the top of the show, this is one of those must-win states for Democrats. Jeanne Shaheen really has to hold on here for them to keep the Senate. So let's take a look. Right now you're seeing she's leading not that many votes in, but what I can tell you is there are some very encouraging signs in the vote that has come in for Jeanne Shaheen, and I want to show you exactly what that looks like. What you see here, what you will see here is a map. These are all the cities and towns in New Hampshire. You see a lot that just aren't in right now. Some important, big, Democratic voter-rich areas are in. And the thing you have to understand before I go into this is President Obama carried New Hampshire in 2012. He won it by 6 points. So the name of the game for Jeanne Shaheen is, can she be replicating? Can she be coming close to what President Obama did in some of these key Democratic areas? Let's take a look. The city of Concord, third largest city in New Hampshire, the capital. President Obama got 65% of the vote here in 2012. Jeanne Shaheen now with 100% in has exceeded President Obama's level in Concord. She has 67%. Manchester, the Queen City in New Hampshire, the largest city. President Obama, 54% here in 2012. Almost all in, Jeanne Shaheen is equaling President Obama's number. And finally, the most liberal city in New Hampshire, Portsmouth, President Obama getting 68% of the vote here in 2012. And Jeanne Shaheen basically right at that number. So what you're seeing early, and I should just caution you, what we're not seeing on this map right down here, this is these are voter-rich suburban bedroom community. These are people who fled Massachusetts because of taxes. This is the most Republican area of the state. At this point, seeing returns like this, it tells me that Scott Brown, from this area I just circled, this part of New Hampshire, he needs monster numbers. They're not in yet. He could get it, but what's in right now, very encouraging for Jeanne Shaheen.
Yeah, those are the people in New Hampshire who have been seeing Massachusetts Senate race ads for Scott Brown years ago before they were seeing New Hampshire Senate race ads for Scott Brown this year. Those border communities, in some ways, get treated very much as the outskirts of Boston in terms of the commutability of that part of the world.
It's the Boston media market, too,
absolutely. Right? Steve Kornacki, thanks very much. Let's bring in our dear friend Tom Brokaw from NBC News. Tom, looking at what we know thus far tonight and what history tells us about what to expect, how do you feel each party's doing?
Well, we don't know yet. But let's talk about Mitch McConnell for a moment, because that's a big victory for the Republican Party to have him now as the Senate Majority Leader if they get to a majority. And the question is, will he change? We were just talking here off the air about a lot of Republican senators have been saying quietly we need to have a different Mitch McConnell because we have to change the message of the party. I mean, Rand Paul is going around saying the brand sucks at this point. And to get ready for 16, they can't go into that election like they have gone into this election, in which the country, the phrase that I've dressed up, an old river guide says, are half-cocked in the ticked-off position. That's kind of where the country is at the moment. So if he begins to change and begins to make some deals and stays true, as I expect that he will, to his fundamental political values, that will be a different game altogether. He still gets up in the morning and forgets to take his charisma pills. There's no question about that. But he's got a great ground game in Kentucky, as he demonstrated tonight. He loves politics. And 2 weeks ago, one of the Republican senators said to me, he's going to be okay. He's going to kick in that ground game and he'll get back again. I just hope he's not about the past when he gets there.
Can we ask about a parallel election situation? Bill Clinton, after he had his very difficult first midterm in 1994, Republicans just absolutely trounced the Democrats. It was seen as brushing him back in a pretty strong way.
Contract for America. Right.
Exactly. The Newt Gingrich years. Between 1994 and 1996, one of the calculations that Republicans made was that they needed to get some governing things done. Right? Bob Dole came back and said, you know what that did is it made people think that Bill Clinton could get things done. Isn't the Republican calculus, isn't the way they look at that history, that they tell each other that there's no reason to appear to be governing from Congress because nobody's going to give Congress get credit for it anyway. All credit always goes to the president, and we want to beat the president's party in 2016.
Well, I think that there's something to that. I mean, somebody said to me today on the Republican side, we're not going to send anything that's going to have his signature on it and which he's going to be able to claim credit for it. So this is going to be a really tricky game for the next 2 years.
What policy is that then? What are they going to pass if
that's
nothing?
Part of the problem. You know, my guess is that not a lot will get done. We've been talking about Senator Portman here today. He came out with, typically for him, his reasoned voice saying we ought to be able to do something about corporate taxes, about job creation. We've got to do something about energy and the Keystone Pipeline. The question then is, who gets the credit for all of that? And does Obama have the instincts of a Bill Clinton to step in and say, this is how I can take credit for that. Bill Clinton goes down to Texas and said, you know, that tax increase is probably a mistake. And then he also says on the Hill, the era of big government is over. I mean, that was an astonishing statement for him at that time. Does President Obama have it in him to do that? And does he want to do that? I don't know. So we can conjecture all we want here. It's going to get interesting from next week on.
Yeah. Let's play Walter Cronkite from the old days. You know, Anwar Sadat, Menachem Begin. Is there a deal here?
That's the way it is.
You can do that too. Talk about the kind of. It seems like there are deals that could benefit both parties and the country better off. It isn't a completely zero sum. The Democrats say they want minimum wage raised up to about $10.50. Republicans always want tax relief for corporations. They'll admit that they want trade expansion. There's a lot of parts that they can be, as clever leaders can put them together and say, we both won. And by the way, Obama's not running again. It's not like Clinton. It's a different scenario. There's going to be an open seat for the presidency.
Well, look, I don't know what they're going to do on minimum wage, but you could see a scenario in which they would say, we'll do it in stages. We'll get to $10 over 18 months or over 2 years or whatever it takes.
But they just elected all these new folks who say there shouldn't even be a minimum wage. You know, I mean, how can they do that with the Joni Ernst, Joni Ernst endorsement being the most important thing for a 2016
The big issue for them is going to be somebody who is a popular voice of their party is Ted Cruz. He said, I'm going to drive the Senate to the right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to go in the other direction. That's a big challenge for Mitch McConnell and the other Republicans who do want to get something.
Yes. I think that's going to be the fact. I think that the Republican Party has effectively had a schism, and that we may see, what'll be interesting to see if there's a governing wing of the party fighting against a confrontational wing of the party.
Let's not overlook the fact that the Republican Party, as it's currently constituted in this year, pretty much sent the Tea Party back to the locker room. You know, the Tea Party didn't dominate their party.
Right.
They didn't have many victories. They were all pumped up. I'm still in touch with a lot of them. But the fact is, you know, and Eric Cantor was not an example because those were self-inflicted wounds, frankly. So the Tea Party, they have removed. Now, what are the lessons in that for them?
Well, look, I think the president has a role here. If he's as smart as Bill Clinton, which he may not be, he will find a way to exploit the victory of the other side. And he'll come back and have something done because he needs a record. More than Mitch McConnell needs a record. This president needs one.
And the country needs some policy.
I think we need a growth, economic growth.
Tom Brokaw, thank you so much for being here, sir. It's great to have you here. Absolutely. In terms of...
I won't forget my shopping list.
No, exactly. Now that it's been delivered on national television, it has that much more oomph. The Senate race in New Hampshire between Jeanne Shaheen and Scott Brown is still too early to call, but we do have a slight update on this call. Look at this. Too early to call right now. You can see the percentage of the vote in is 23%, but right now Jeanne Shaheen is leading. So that is still too early to call, but the NBC characterization of this race is that Jeanne Shaheen is in the lead. But again, less than a quarter of the expected vote in New Hampshire. Down in Florida, the governor's race is still too close to call. Our friend Ed Schultz is joining us now from Charlie Crist headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida. Ed, what's the update from St. Pete?
Well, the update here, Rachel, is that the Crist camp is a little bit concerned that they're not pulling the numbers that they need to pull out of the three Democratic strongholds, which is Broward County, Dade, and Palm Beach County. I mean, they thought that they were going to get better numbers than what they've got right now. So there is a little bit of concern in that regard. But what's unfolding here is this hour of requested hour of extra voting time in Broward County, that being rejected. You know, this could open up a huge controversy in the coming days, depending on how this race tightens, the way it unfolds, and how it ends up on the final count, because obviously there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, well, you know, I went to vote, but I wasn't allowed to because the machines didn't work. And of course, the legal process has been stymied, and Crist camp lost a big motion tonight. So you have a difference of 123,000. They could make that up in about 3 blocks in Broward County. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to be a long night here. No one's throwing in the towel, but they are a little disappointed in the numbers as far as turnout. They've exceeded the 2010 numbers, but not enough. And that's kind of the feeling right now, and they're a little bit anxious.
Thanks for the solid update, Ed. We'll be right back. That was at CRIST headquarters. When we come back, polls will be closed in other key states across the country, Colorado and Kansas included. And that fight, the Senate fight race up there, we'll see back when I can read the prompter. We'll be right back. Well, it's nearly 9 p.m. now Eastern Time, and the polls are about to close in 14 more states, including Colorado, Kansas, Louisiana, and Wisconsin.
We have just had one slight change to a call from a state in which the polls are already closed. The Connecticut governor's race, it had been too early to call. Connecticut governor is now too close to call. And again, this is the rematch.
Do you honestly think there's somebody out there remarking their card? I went, oh, Mike, did you just happen? We went from too close to too early. Oh, my God, give me a beer.
Well, but if you were thinking that Connecticut governor was going to be a blowout,
I know.
It was just early.
I think
come on.
No, we're very careful about these things, but I wonder if the average
He's
viewer.
not going to give it to you, Rachel.
No,
okay, you're right. It's amazing news, and I tell you, my life has changed.
If you are a civics dork, this is like the litmus test of dorkitude. If you are a big enough dork, too close versus too early, it's like the difference between day and night.
This is going to be one of those editorial cartoons. Did you hear what she said?
Right.
Too early.
Exactly.
Anyway, you're on.
Thank you.
Yes.
At the top of the hour, in 20 seconds, polls in 14 different states are going to be closing. We've got closed Senate races and also closed governor's races here. Keep in mind that we're still waiting on Senate results in North Carolina, New Hampshire, Virginia, and Georgia. We're still waiting on governor's results in Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maine, Connecticut, and Georgia. Those are all places where the polls have already closed, but we don't yet have conclusive results. In terms of polls closing, though, at 9 o'clock, let's start with the Senate races, and then we'll do the governors thereafter. In the Senate races, this is a Republican pickup. This is the Tim Johnson Senate seat in South Dakota. Tim Johnson, the retiring Democratic senator. This will now be, according to NBC News projections, this will be a seat held by Mike Rounds, the Republican candidate in the South Dakota Senate race. An interesting three-way race there. In the Kansas Senate race, incumbent Republican Pat Roberts facing off against an independent named Greg Orman. This one is too close to call. Just 9% of the vote in thus far in Kansas. In Colorado, the Senate race where Mark Udall, the Democratic incumbent, is trying to hold on to his seat. He's facing off against Republican Congressman Cory Gardner. This one is too early to call in Colorado. In the Louisiana Senate race, it's another Democratic incumbent, Mary Landrieu, facing off against Republican Bill Cassidy. This one, according to NBC News projections, is also too early to call. In Michigan, the Senate race there is a call. Projected winner, according to NBC News, is Gary Peters. That's the Democratic seat there. Carl Levin is retiring as the Democratic incumbent. It's an open seat. It will be held by the Democratic Party. In the Minnesota Senate race, incumbent Democrat Al Franken holding on to his seat, according to NBC News projections. In the Texas Senate race, do we have the Texas Senate race? Yes, we do. Texas incumbent Republican Senator John Cornyn is projected to hold on to his seat in Texas. In Nebraska, NBC News is also projecting the new Republican senator from Nebraska will be Ben Sasse. He's the projected winner there. In Wyoming, the Republican incumbent senator there, Mike Enzi, has held on to his seat after a would-be primary challenge from Liz Cheney fizzled out. Mike Enzi winning in Wyoming to hold on to his seat. And in New Mexico, in the Senate race there, this is Tom Udall, the Democratic incumbent, facing off against a Republican challenger named Alan Way. This one is too early to call. We do have a call now in New Hampshire. We have been waiting on this one. NBC News can now project that the New Hampshire Senate race has been held by the incumbent Democrat, Jeanne Shaheen, defeating Scott Brown, who moved from Massachusetts to face her. Scott, let me get your reaction to that one.
Well, Rachel, everybody has their own way of looking at how this election can turn out when it's all over in January 6th. I think there's a route. It may be a difficult route. It may be it's plausible. In fact, based upon the numbers, it is plausible. She just won. That's the first step. The next step is to win if the Democrats want to control the Senate next time. Win in North Carolina. That's when Hagan has to hang on there and win. Then pick up Kansas because of the independent candidate who will go with the Democrats if it's decisive, we're told. Then win in Alaska, which is always hard to poll. And then go out and win the final races. Michelle Nunn has to nail it down January 6th. It is doable. In fact, it's almost within the margin of error in all those cases. So it's not a pipe dream. It is going to be tricky. They have to win all 5.
Yeah.
There's one alternative. Instead of winning in Alaska, they could win possibly in either Colorado or Iowa, but they're difficult, more difficult. It is doable tonight. If you're watching, hoping, if you're a progressive or a Democrat, you just like a good fight, there is a possibility, a possible route for the Democrats to hold on tonight
in terms
after all this talk. It's
but we do have a lot more information than we already have. Kansas, too close to call. Colorado, too early to call with that win in New Hampshire. I should also say that Scott Brown just made history. He is now the first person in American history to have lost Senate races to 2 different women. So Scott Brown,
who's next?
Feminist hero.
Maine, take on Susan Collins in 6 years. He'll go to Maine.
We've got some news in terms of governor's races. I believe, do we have governor's boards now in terms of polls that just closed at 9 p.m.? The Wisconsin governor's race. So this, of course, is a very closely watched race. Scott Walker, the embattled Republican incumbent, facing off against Democrat Mary Burke. NBC News is characterizing this as too close to call in Wisconsin. In the Kansas governor's race, the heart-right Republican, proud conservative governor there, Sam Brownback, in a race against a Democrat named Paul Davis. This one just 9% of the vote in. This is too close to call in the deep red state of Kansas. In the Colorado governor's race, the Democratic incumbent there is John Hickenlooper. His opponent is former Republican Congressman Bob Beaupre. This one is too early to call in Colorado. In Michigan, the governor's race, about 11% in there. The Republican incumbent there is Rick Snyder. He's facing off against Democratic challenger Mark Schauer. This one is too early to call in Michigan. In Texas, there is a call. The new Texas Republican governor will be Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott defeating Democratic national household name Wendy Davis to keep the Texas governorship in Republican hands, according to NBC News projections. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo also projected by NBC News to be holding on to his seat in the state of New York. In the Minnesota governor's race, NBC News can project that Democratic incumbent Mark Dayton will also hold on to that governorship. In the South Dakota governor's race, the projected winner is the incumbent Republican Dennis Daugaard. In Wyoming, the governor's race in Wyoming, the projected winner is the incumbent Republican Matt Mead. In Arizona, this has been an interesting race to watch. Jan Brewer in Arizona, very high-profile Republican governor there, is stepping down. Doug Ducey wants to replace her as a Republican. Fred Duvall, the Democrat, vying for that seat in Arizona. It is too early to call. In New Mexico, Republican incumbent Susana Martinez facing a Democratic challenge from Gary King. That one's also too early to call. And in the great state of Nebraska, the governor's race has just 6% in. That's too early to call between Republican Pete Ricketts and Democrat Chuck Hasselbrook. That is a red state, obviously, but that is an open governor's seat. In the Florida governor's race, now these are a few governor's races where the polls already closed before the top of the hour, but we're still watching these races. Look at this, 95% of the vote in the Florida governor's race. You can see just about 100,000 votes, 125,000 votes between Rick Scott, the Republican incumbent, and Charlie Crist, the Democrat. With 95% in, this is not being called. This is too close to call, according to NBC News projections for Florida governor. The Illinois governor's race, this one also too close to call at this point. Pat Quinn, the incumbent Democrat, I think it's fair to call him an embattled incumbent Democrat, facing off against businessman Republican Bruce Rauner. This one, less than 30,000 votes between them, under 10% of the vote in. The Massachusetts governor's race, Martha Coakley, the Democrat, and Charlie Baker, the Republican. This one is too close to call. Less than 1 in 5 votes are in the Bay State thus far. In Maine, this has been a great one to watch. Paul LePage and Elliott Cutler were both in this race in 2010 when Paul LePage took office in Maine as the Republican governor with far short of the majority, anything close to a majority vote, because it was a three-way race. It's another three-way race now in Maine. No call there yet from NBC News. In the Connecticut governor's race, Dan Malloy and Tom Foley, they're having a rematch from their 2010 race. This one is too close to call. In terms of governor's races, the only other one we're watching right now that we've got information on is this Georgia governor's race. Nathan Deal, the Republican incumbent, against Jason Carter, the Democratic challenger. This one is too early to call. I want to go to Steve Kornacki right now in terms of what we know in the Florida governor's race. It's amazing. We've got 96% of the vote in right now, but this is still too close to call. What's going on, Steve?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a collective flashback to 2000 now. You remember how late that night was in Florida. You remember all those South Florida county names that we all got so familiar with in 2000. So where it stands right now is Charlie Crist is looking at a gap of a little over 125,000 votes. That's what he's got to make up. Now let's go inside Florida and take a look. And here you go. It's these big three. This is the crown jewel of Democratic politics in Florida. Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade County. These are massive counties, massive Democratic vote-producing counties. Let's look inside and see what's happening there, if I can get that off the screen. So let's take a look. Broward, for instance, right here in the middle. And you can see right now, obviously, Charlie Crist doing very well very well right now. This number you're seeing, this says 21% is in. This suggests there's a huge amount of vote that's still out there. It's actually not the case. There's been a ton of absentee ballots that have come in, that have been counted. It doesn't affect the percentage of precincts that are reporting. So this is actually a little bit misleading when you look at that. The total in Broward, the total vote that came in the last time around. So I'm going to look at my notes here because I got it. The total number of votes were about 415,000 in Broward County the last time there was an election. So as you can see, you're already creeping up there close to 300,000. So it's not 21% that's in. So there's fewer votes outstanding here. You can see Charlie Crist, though, still an opportunity to make it up. And again, you look like in Miami-Dade, another opportunity here for Charlie Crist to make up ground. He's tracking at 57%. This is another one, says 45%, fewer votes. So that's what he's got to do. He has got to rack up the score in these three counties right now where there's still significant number of votes out and somehow try to make up that 125,000 vote gap.
Being able to go county by county explains everything you need to know about how you can get that close to an overall statewide number and still not be able to call it. We do have one other race that I want to take a look at right now in the state of Arkansas. I'm not sure if we've got a board here on this one. Do we? Yes, good. The Arkansas, this is a fascinating sort of sleeper issue. In Arkansas, one of the things that was on the ballot this year was increasing the minimum wage. Arkansas, a red state, the Arkansas Republican legislature was not going to vote for an increase in the minimum wage, but they put it directly to the voters, and boy, did voters like this idea. Look at that, a 2-to-1 margin, 66% for, and raising the minimum wage in Arkansas passes not by an act of the legislature, but instead by a direct vote of the people of Arkansas. There have been 11 times now. There's been 11 times now that the minimum wage has been on the ballot since 2010, in which we've got a result. There's 3 more we're waiting on tonight. All 11 times since 2010, when it has been on the ballot, it has passed, and it always passes by huge margins.
Well, let's bring in our colleague Lawrence O'Donnell, who's down in Greg Orman headquarters in Kansas. Lawrence, all concern has reached into your heart. We want to know who's going to win in Kansas. Greg Orman going to win?
Everyone here wants to know that. Anecdotally, the excitement here at Orman headquarters is that there were some lines, significant lines in Johnson County today. They expect that to be a strong area for Orman voters. And, Chris, we do not know at this hour. This is way too close to call here. It has been. There was a period there about a month ago where Greg Orman opened up a lead in the polls, but that closed back down into this very tight race. It has been a nasty race. 58% of the ads here have been attack ads. The only state with more attack ads, North Carolina, 67% of the ads there, attack ads. This state is weary from those attack ads. Voters here today are telling me they are relieved that the attack ads are over. They get to vote. They get to count these votes tonight, Chris.
You know, in the old days of voting, which is many years ago for me, the rule was don't make yourself too available. And I get the feeling that Greg Orman's not made himself very available. Nobody knows what party he's in. Has he been too cute? Too cloying on this issue?
I think you can judge if he's been too cute by the outcome tonight, Chris. It may be that if he comes in a little bit short, then maybe he should have said during the campaign something more clear about what he would do if control of the Senate is up to him. What he did say very clearly is, if one party or the other wins control of the Senate without his vote, he will then vote with that party so that he will bring more power to Kansas. He'll be on the winning side that way. And what Joe Biden said today, I just want to clarify, there's been a lot of controversy here in Kansas that Joe Biden indicated that there was some idea at the White House that Greg Orman was going to vote with the Democrats. What Joe Biden actually said was he expected the Democrats to elect 51 senators and not actually need Orman's vote, and that's how they would get Orman's vote, is that they would have the majority already. In other words, what Biden said actually fits what Orman has been saying all all year.
Here's a question, though.
And Chris, if you're looking for clues, Chris, here are some clues for you. At Princeton, he was in the college Republicans. When he started making political contributions, he started making them to Republicans. Then in 2007, he started making contributions to Democrats, including President Obama, then candidate Obama, candidate Al Franken, and his contributions have just been for Democrats since then. So the record is mixed.
At 3 o'clock this morning, if we get a call in Alaska, and the Democrats have a real chance to still hold control of the Senate after it's all, because he wins there, Greg Orman wins there, and of course they win in North Carolina, they win in Alaska, they have a shot. If it's 48-50, and they're waiting for the decision to come out of Georgia come January 6th, is this guy Orman going to sit around and wait till then to decide whether he's going to add it up to 50? Because together,
he's not going to be allowed to sit. He won't be allowed to sit around and wait, Chris, because the leaders of both parties will be all over him, making offers to him. And one thing the Democrats are going to tell him is, remember what those Republicans did to you with those attack ads. On the other hand, what Orman is going to do is remember what those Republicans did with the attack ads and think, the next time I run, do I want to face those attack ads or do I want them on my side?
That's exactly what I thought.
Lawrence O'Donnell at Greg Orman headquarters in Kansas, where it is too close to call at this point. We're looking at about 18% of the vote in that Kansas Senate rate. Just fascinating. I do have two results I want to bring you from the great state of Nebraska. The first one, we were calling it too early to call just moments ago, but now NBC News can project the winner of the Nebraska governor's race. It is Republican Pete Ricketts. This was an open seat, but it had been previously held by a Republican. I think we've also got one other result from Nebraska. Again, I was just talking about the minimum wage and how it always wins, no matter how red the state is. In Nebraska, it was Initiative 425. And Nebraska voters, as Republican as they are, they sure do love the idea of giving America a raise. A huge vote tonight thus far for the Nebraska Raise the Minimum Wage initiative. It is one of 4 states that's voting on that tonight. So those are 2 results just in from the great state of Nebraska. I also want to do one more result that we just did a moment ago, which was the Minnesota Senate race. Minnesota Senator Al Franken, the Democratic incumbent there, reelected in Minnesota, according to NBC News projections. Joining us now is his home state colleague, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. Congratulations on your pal and colleague winning re-election.
Well, it was a little easier than last time.
Yes.
Whereas, 312 votes, and it took him 6 months to get there. I kept telling our Minnesotans they can't start chants at, say, 5.5 more years. So we're excited about this, and we're also excited about Governor Dayton. And as you know, Rachel, they both ran really strongly on the economy, on economic accomplishments with our 4.1% unemployment, the fact that we have done a good job in terms of encouraging business and workers, and it's just been a positive campaign here in Minnesota. At the same time, we're very concerned about the races across the country, but I did have to smile when I saw my good friend Jeanne Shaheen win, and actually a victory for the Constitution, which says that each state can have 2 senators, but each senator can't have 2 states.
Excellent. Well done. It's political science in the form of limericks, which is one of the things I've always loved about you. I got to ask, with Governor Dayton being reelected, with Senator Franken being reelected, with you in the other Senate seat in Minnesota, with our dear friend Michelle Bachmann leaving politics, as the rest of the country looks at Minnesota, you guys always get shorthanded as a purple state. Has Minnesota gone blue? Should it be seen as a more democratic place than it usually gets credit for?
Well, I think it is still purple. We have very close state house races going on. We have two contested congressional seats, and the president, I think, won by 7 points, which is exact same margin in Wisconsin last time. But I think the difference is we've really focused in our state politics and in these races on the economy. And I think one of the Wednesday morning quarterbacking questions will be, was there any kind of a trend between for candidates that focused on the economy, on a little bit on accomplishments, knowing there's so much to go, but also talked about minimum wage and issues like that mattered really at the heart of people in this country. And so I think that's going to be looking at the races in the Senate and see if there's any kind of a trend there is important.
Senator, let me ask you about your colleague who was just declared the winner for re-election. He's found a very unusual career path. He's gone from being a very well-known figure in American life, especially our cultural life. In fact, you might even say a celebrity. He's gone from being a celebrity to a non-celebrity. He's become a senator. Now, this is really a strange decision. Most people like to get better known. It seems like he has followed a strategy for 6 years of, as well, I think it was Steve Martin who said, let's get small. And he got small. He hasn't done any national interviews. We can't get him on our show. I don't know if you've had any luck, Rachel.
Well,
he doesn't do any national. Go ahead. What's that strategy like?
Do you want me to put a good word in for you, Chris?
No, I just want to ask you. I want to get your Sardi's review of this brilliant transformation from famous national celebrity in the culture world to just another good United States senator from the state of Minnesota. I think it's remarkable how well he's been disciplined to do this. I'm celebrating his victory because of everyone should have a second act, and he has got one.
Well, you know, I think what he's done, he said he was going to do this from the beginning. He put his head down. He got to work. He did things that mattered to the people of our state and put our state first. And that's what this campaign's been about. That's what the election's been about across our state. So, and I do think the fact that we have the lowest unemployment rate of any metropolitan area in the country. We have worked hard to have a strong education system in Minnesota. And the governor took a $6 billion deficit and turned it into a $1.2 billion surplus with the help of so many strong businesses and workers in our state has really been our message. And I don't think it's completely unique. I think you see some other people running on that across the country. So we're happy, but we have really difficult races out there. And maybe I'll be up with you at 3 a.m., Chris, waiting for those Alaska numbers
Let me talk about you now, Senator. Take a moment. Everybody likes you. And everybody in the national media likes you, I think. And everybody that knows you in your state likes you. And the question is, how do you get to be president of the United States? With Hillary Clinton
Chris,
probably running. How do you get around Hillary Clinton? Because that's the only route to win. You have to go around her. How do you do that?
I think you are aware that all the Democratic women senators signed a letter encouraging Hillary to run. We're excited about her running. And right now, what are we focused on tonight? The midterm elections.
It's over.
Including
Let's
those
talk 2016.
It is not
it's
over. This is there is so much more work that needs to be done here with these states. And I'm hanging in there for Bruce Braley in Iowa and Mark Udall in Colorado and my good friend Mark Begich up in Alaska, who has created the best voter turnout they've ever seen up there, more polling places, more early voting. And so we're hanging in on those races in a very difficult map.
You've made my point. You are a national figure, rooting for everyone across the country. Thank you, Senator Amy Klobuchar, who everybody actually does like.
Thank you.
And by the way, coming up now, Congressman Louis Gutierrez, who's a Democrat from Illinois. Congressman, thank you for joining us. You know, there's been a lot of talk about what the president might do after this election's over, starting tomorrow morning. Do you have any signals from the White House, from Valerie Jarrett or anyone, McDonough, the chief of staff, or the president himself, that he might do something dramatic in the area of immigration?
I do, and I'm encouraging. I've been talking to you and other members, thinking it's going to be millions. The question is it going to be a half a loaf or a full loaf? And one of the things I'm encouraging the White House is to seek fairness and justice for every immigrant they can. Don't try to dilute it with political consideration about maybe the good, plausible immigrants that you think the American public, you know, we raise the minimum wage for all workers. We seek justice and marriage equality for all gay people. We do for all women pay and fair rate of pay for them. We should do the same thing when it comes to immigrants. So my hope is, and you know what? If they don't do it, I will tell you there will be a fight for the Democratic nomination and a fight for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. And don't expect, look, I just came back from being with Mark Udall all day yesterday. I've traveled across this country everywhere. What candidates are telling me is that it is hard to get the sentiment of the Latino vote
Hang
out.
in there. You're making a very dramatic statement. Let's go right now. Hang in there, Congressman Gutierrez. We've got an announcement to make. This is the Oklahoma governor's race. NBC's projecting Mary Fallin will win that race, and that's a big one down there in Oklahoma. Mary Fallin defeating Joe Dorman down there.
Holding on to that seat. That's right.
Holding on to the seat. That's a keeper. And I want to get back to Congressman Gutierrez, because what do you mean to say there's going to be something rather dramatic if he doesn't do what you want him to do? Give us a little definition of what you're talking about.
What? It isn't. Well, I just want. Here's what I believe. Look, the president can make a decision and he can say, well, I'm going to free and allow 2.5 million undocumented immigrants to come forward. Or he can be bold and he can be generous and make it 5 to 6. The Senate passed the bill. we are encouraging the president to allow all of those that have been here, that are ready to come forward with their fingerprints and submit to a security and background check to be able to be legalized. He's got to pick a date. For the dreamers, the young undocumented immigrants, he said they had to be here 5 years before he would allow them to be in. Pick a date, Mr. President, but pick a date that is broad, that is sweeping, and that really fits. I heard you earlier. I'm a big fan of MSNBC, and you said, hey, the president needs a record. Look, the Republicans are not going to give him a record. The president has to stand up for a community of people that have stood up for him. If 74% of Latinos voted for him, 80% of Asians did, and the immigrant community expects a president that is going to be responsive to their needs and to their genuine support for him and the Democratic Party.
What do you say if the president is threatened with impeachment for that? Too dramatic a use of the EO.
Well, here's what I say.
What would you say to him about that threat? Because there will be something like that hanging out there. What would you say to him if somebody says, be careful, Mr. President? You will then say what?
Yeah. Here's what I've said. Leader Pelosi, we put out there a document this past week in which we have given all of the times the presidents have used their executive authority to intervene and to save immigrant communities so that the Congress can finally get around to taking care of them. So what I would say to the president, you're on good standing. If we are going to allow the Republicans to the threat of impeachment from stopping fairness and justice for our community, then you know what? Why don't we all become Republicans then? And then we can all dictate the future. We're Democrats, and we have to stand for our values and for our principles. Okay. And I think that this president right now has the opportunity. You know, everybody said, oh, it's already written, his legacy. No, it isn't. It will be written in the next 45 days when it comes vis-a-vis the immigrant policy of this president. Be bold, be generous, be a Democrat.
Congressman Luis Gutierrez of Illinois, thank you, sir, both for your passion on that and your clarity on that. I think that the thing that is often forgotten in this discussion is that the immediate political calculation gets told in political science textbooks, but the history gets told in the wisdom of the policy that you stick your neck out for. Nobody remembers what you earned in the next election cycle because of it. They remember if it was the right thing to do. All right, we're going to have more on the question of immigration. After this, we're still waiting for lots and lots of results. This is sort of the sweet spot in terms of the suspense for the night. Stay with us. MSNBC's election coverage continues right after this. Control of the United States Senate still hangs in the balance, but in terms of big results we've got already on the United States Senate, Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell holds on to his seat. Allison Lundergan Grimes has conceded. She's already given her speech, as has he. In Arkansas, Democrat Mark Pryor has lost his seat to Republican Congressman Tom Cotton. In the great state of New Hampshire, the Democratic incumbent there, Jeanne Shaheen, she has held on to her seat. She has defeated a challenge from former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown. Now, in terms of races that for the United States Senate that are still listed as too early to call, those include the Senate races in Georgia. In Georgia, we're looking at David Perdue versus Michelle Nunn. That race too early to call. Another too early to call race is the one in Louisiana, where Democratic incumbent Mary Landrieu is facing Bill Cassidy as her main challenger, but there's, I think, 8 people on the ballot altogether. In Louisiana, it's still too early to call. The other big too early to call race, look at this. Colorado Senate, Cory Gardner versus incumbent Democrat Mark Udall. Half the vote in so far. This is still too early to call. In terms of races that are too close to call, those include the Kansas Senate race, where incumbent Republican Pat Roberts trying to hold on to his seat against a tough challenge from an independent named Greg Orman. Only about 1,000 votes, 1,400 votes between them, with about 21% of the vote in Kansas. That is too close to call. It is also too close to call, and this is interesting, in North Carolina. Too close to call between Kay Hagan, the Democratic incumbent, and Tom Tillis, her Republican challenger and the leader of the Republicans in the North Carolina legislature. 64% of the vote in thus far in North Carolina. We're also looking at a race that is too close to call in the Senate race in Virginia. in Virginia right now. Again, Kansas and North Carolina all too close to call. Again, it's too early in Georgia, Louisiana, and Colorado. I want to go for immediate response to Maria Teresa Komar and also to Reverend Al Sharpton and Chris Hayes from MSNBC, looking at the overall state of the Senate right now. Obviously, tons of important governor's races still to come. But Maria Teresa, when you look at these results thus far, what kind of night do you think this has been?
I think it's going the way that we expected. A lot of folks, we have Mitch McConnell, basically, that it was a landslide for him. I don't think that very many folks were surprised. But I think that you have a silver lining when it comes to whether the Democrats are going to pull it out. You see Georgia, where 4% of the Latino vote is still coming up. And they are the fastest growing county in all of the United States, is Stewart County. That hasn't reported. So it'll be interesting what happens, especially because in Georgia, they actually had the roughest, most oppressive immigration law. And we'll see whether or not the black-brown vote actually comes out. In Colorado, you see the same thing. You have roughly over 147 initiatives around the country. Those ballot initiatives, conversely, people come out more if there's a ballot initiative. And you have personhood right now in Colorado, Latino voters, women voters in Colorado. I think that's actually going to be something that we're going to see, because that's what gets people off the couch.
It was interesting, though, watching that Arkansas minimum wage measure. So huge. Arkansas, the Democrats there knew that it was going to pass. What they hoped was that it would goose Democratic base voter turnout enough to give Mark Pryor a chance to hold on to his seat. Mark Pryor, at the poll closing, lost his seat, but that's still won by big double digits. So I think Democrats hang a lot of hope on the turnout effect that these ballot measures can have, but it just depends on how big a hill you got to climb for these things.
But I think one of the things that we're seeing, a couple of things. One, the whole sweep, the avalanche that we were told for months that was going to happen for Republicans has not happened. Now, of course, we don't know whether or not they end up with the majority, but we clearly are not being drenched. You know, we can put away the umbrella, maybe keep out a shower cap, but the flood is not going to happen. Secondly, I think that the route that Chris Matthews said
still alive
is still alive and possible. But let us listen very carefully, because I agree with Congressman Gutierrez and with Maria. It is going to be in many of these key states black and brown voters that even make it close or victorious. Question is, what are we going to get in those communities for doing that? And that could lead to some very serious debate going into 16, because Georgia may be bailed out, Florida and North Carolina, by black and brown voters, and we do not want to just be the ones to deliver people and then go home.
Not being a frail flower. What is the demand?
Well, I think the demand is clear, that you're dealing with immigration rights, you're dealing with voter rights, you're dealing with we cannot have, and I think this is going to be a real test for Mrs. Clinton and others in 16. You can't have people come out and vote to protect voter ID, immigration rights, and a lot of progressive thoughts, and reward them with triangulation. Because that did not bring you into the competition you're in tonight. So I think that you really are going to watch where these votes come from and where people are going.
You also have to distinguish yourselves on the record. I mean, the Republicans have chosen to obstruct on immigration, making the calculation that obstructing would split the blame evenly. And there is some evidence that has been somewhat effective. If you look at the polling that's come out of Latino Decisions today on Latino voters in Colorado, there's a relatively narrow gap between Cory Gardner, who's part of the House Republicans that block comprehensive immigration reform,
and who is opposed to
immigration reform, and Mark Udall.
Right, but the interesting thing about Gardner is that he also is for personhood. The #1 voter within the Latino community are young women, or Latina women, and that's because the average Latina voter is 27 years old. So when we're talking about minimum wage, when we're talking about the issues of personhood, when we're talking about immigration, they're all living it right now, and that's what the Republican Party has to keep paying attention to.
Which is okay. So this is a little bit meta, but this I think is the most fascinating thing about this Colorado race between Cory Gardner and Mark Udall, because Cory Gardner was a sponsor of personhood when it's come up before in Colorado. He is still a sponsor of it federally. He's running as if he thinks personhood is a terrible idea. Cory Gardner is against immigration reform. He's running against Mark Udall because Mark Udall didn't get immigration reform passed. So if Cory Gardner beats Mark Udall in Colorado today, it will be because he ran to the left of Mark Udall, criticizing Mark Udall for not being able to deliver on the stuff that Cory Gardner is is opposed to. Right. That tells you that Democrats win the argument even if they lose the race.
Let me just say one before we jump all over the Republicans on immigration, which they're wrong on. But this president has not been politically deft on immigration. He wants the issue. I'm not sure he wants the damn bill because he sells it as he is for amnesty. That Senate bill is damn tough. It's got teeth in it. Why do you think it got a dozen Republican votes? It has real tough things on on E-Verify. It really has to work. You have to be legally here to work here. In 4 years, you have to have a photo ID. It's no more BS hiring cheap labor. You're hopping across the border. It's really tough. And yet he never says that because he wants to appeal to your community. He doesn't want to sell it.
But I think that's not true. He says that it's tough. He got up there in the State of the Union. He basically said, we've deported more people, and we've got $20 billion coming to the border.
You're changing the subject. It's not deportation.
He talks about how tough. They lead with how tough it is. They put $20 billion to buy Gatling guns and put them at the border.
That's not the issue. You're changing the subject. The bill doesn't talk about Gatling guns or deportation. The bill talks about no more illegal hiring. That's the magnet for people coming here. And he doesn't sell that part. He just doesn't. And he ought to stop going for the issue and start going for the bill. And your community is sick of waiting. So I would say it's time for him to get a bill and stop talking the issue.
Well, I mean, first of all, the president can't pass a bill, right? He can do an executive order.
He certainly championed the bill, and he's not doing it.
But I think at the same time is that I don't think the American people realize how tough this bill is.
Why doesn't he tell us?
When he talks about E-Verify, that's every single U.S. citizen also that needs to make sure that they also have the right application.
Like every other country in the world, you need a work permit to work here.
But I think that a lot of libertarians are all of a sudden, they're going to go berserk when they actually find that. I think the more we start digging into it, but I think we have to have, but besides that, when we start talking about immigration reform, we need to have an honest conversation with the American public. We're no longer in a place where this is a luxury. We actually need the workforce.
That's the point.
I know, I agree. Well, let's look. Look, there has to be controls on immigration. And if you don't think so, you're never going to get a bill anyway.
But Chris, that's my point. We've got to come with something of substance. I mean, we're dealing with the era of Michael Brown and Ferguson and all that. People are going to the polls because they're angry and impassioned, and the Democratic Party can't run away from the base that brought them competitive tonight. If they do, it's going to be a problem.
I think the president needs a bill. He doesn't need an issue. He needs a bill right now. Let's go to some news right now from Louisiana. The interesting call here is that this race is going to go to a runoff, and that, of course, will be in December. Nobody's going to get the requisite 50% majority to be able to win this thing tonight because of today's voting. This is a big development. It means that, at least on paper, look at this race here. Obviously, there's a lot of people voting for Manis, the conservative there. But it looks like with a big push, Mary Landrieu's still in this game. And that means that's going to be an interesting election. Lots of money is going to be pouring into Louisiana between now, especially if it's decisive.
Yeah, that'll happen
in
December. 8 people on that ballot, and so everybody thought it's going to be hard for anybody to get to 50%. The issue, though, is that once you go to the runoff, it doesn't matter what Rob Manis was able to do. It's just going to be 2 people there. Mary Landrieu is the last statewide elected Democrat in Louisiana. It's going to be very hard for her to win that race. And if the Democrats need that seat in order to hold on to the Senate, it is going to have to be a global effort by Democrats in order to try to save her.
Isn't she also the last Democrat representing the Deep South in the Senate?
Well, let's talk about Kay Hagan right now, because Kay Hagan in the North Carolina Senate race,
you're right.
Right now, that is too close to call. And I think, Steve Kornacki, have you got a little more for us in terms of what's going on in that North Carolina Senate race?
Yeah, let's take a look here. Some interesting things that are still outstanding. Let's take a closer look inside North Carolina. And as you can see, just in terms of the returns, the return pattern here, the pattern in the last hour or so has been tightening. And now you can see Hagan actually falling 2,000 votes behind Tillis. That's with about 70% in. But I want to show you what is still left to come in and why Democrats aren't necessarily alarmed by that, although obviously it's concerning for them. But take a look at this map here and take a look closely. This is Mecklenburg County. This is where Charlotte is, Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can see, now again, we talked about this with Florida. It says that 10% is in. That's not actually really accurate. You're expecting a little over 200,000, about 225,000 maybe would be the ideal turnout here in Mecklenburg County. So you add that together and you're seeing basically probably about half the vote is in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte. Kay Hagan is doing exactly what she needs to do right now. This is about what she did in 2008 when she won the seat, 62%. It's about what President Obama did in Mecklenburg County. So if that holds, what you're talking about here when 100% finally comes in from Mecklenburg would be an additional plurality of 30,000 votes for Kay Hagan. So this is a big Democratic vote-rich area that's probably only about half in right now. And actually, it's not the only place in North Carolina where that's the case. You can look closer. This is Durham County. Durham right outside of Raleigh. Same thing. Now here you're looking at now close to 3/4 of the vote is in. But again, look at the massive margin for Kay Hagan here. She's leading by 38,000. You can expect, again, probably that's going to grow by 10, 12,000. So there are a few of those. There's still votes outstanding in Wake County, which is right here. That's Raleigh. And one other thing quickly to show you on this map. This is interesting to me. We're always talking about, is the Democratic base turning out? Are those Obama voters turning out? Are they excited for this midterm election? Here's Orange County. This is the heart of Obama country. These are college students. This is the University of North Carolina. In 2012, when President Obama got really big numbers in North Carolina, he won Orange County by 33,000 votes. Tonight, 100% is in Orange County, and Kay Hagan's come pretty close to that. She's won this thing by 26,000 votes. That's monster turnout. That's an incredible performance by her. And again, that bodes well when you're looking at these other Democratic areas that are still yet to come. There are still some Republican areas, too, very close, but Democrats are encouraged because of what I just showed you.
Steve Kornacki, thank you, getting us inside those numbers there. In terms of, again, Senate races outstanding right now, too early to call in Georgia and Colorado, too close to call in Kansas, Virginia, and in North Carolina for all the reasons Steve was just explaining. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be going live to Colorado to Senator Mark Udall's headquarters. Again, that Colorado Senate race, just a crucial one for the Democrats. It is considered to be too early to call, with about 59% of the vote in Colorado. We're going to live to Colorado right when we get back. Stay with us. In terms of the overall state of the United States House of Representatives, NBC has been able to project since about 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight that the House will be held in Republican control for another 2 years. This is the overall projection right now. Out of 435 seats, the projection right now from NBC News is that the Republicans will go up to about 243. The Democrats will drop to about 192. Again, this is not a characterization of any individual race, and the margin of error there, as you see, is plus or minus 7 in terms of that projection. So this could still change, but it looks like a good night, but not an earth-changing night for Republicans in the House. This is a race a lot of people have been keeping an eye on. Seth Moulton is an Iraq War veteran. He served multiple combat tours as a United States Marine in Iraq. He ousted Democratic incumbent John Tierney in Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. And tonight he had a race against a Republican who was considered to be a tough race. An interesting swing district in Massachusetts, running against an openly gay Republican. But Seth Moulton has won tonight in Massachusetts, that House race. In Colorado.
In Colorado, by the way, the polls have been closed for 45 minutes. The Senate race between Mark Udall and Cory Gardner is still too early to call, obviously. And as the governor's race there, here we have Ron Mott. He joins us now from Mark Udall headquarters out there in Denver. Ron, thank you for joining us. This is a race that the Democrats aren't particularly optimistic about. I can say in the last couple of days. How do they feel in the headquarters?
Well, they're late getting here, for one thing, Chris. Good evening to you guys both. I think they're expecting a long night here, quite frankly. You saw the early numbers. Still a lot of ballots to be counted. The 3 counties that we're really looking at to determine whether this race goes Republican or Democrat are Arapahoe County to the south and east of Denver, Jefferson County to the west, and Larimer County up to the north. And those are swing counties. What a lot of folks are talking about in this race is because the economy is chugging along fairly well here in Colorado, that Mark Udall didn't really have a lot of things that his opponent could attack him on. And so instead what they have done is attacked him on the style of campaign he has run this fall. What a lot of folks are calling a one-issue campaign that Mark Udall has run about women's rights and reproduction. That message has sold pretty well around the country, but apparently is not selling as well here in Colorado. The numbers are showing that the voters are pushing back with that message, and some people have said that this is an extremist campaign that he's run here, and certainly that's not the kind of state Colorado is. Now, going forward, if the Democrats lose that seat, plus lose the governor's mansion as well, there's going to be some sobering post-mortem here about what this means for 2016, because President Obama won here in 2008 and 2012. What does this mean for 16 if they lose one or both of these seats and they go blue, or go red, I should say? Yeah. This state has been proudly purple over the past few cycles, but we could see a fundamental shift here, guys, tonight to the right.
Yeah, proudly purple is right. And it's probably like a lot of states. It isn't like everybody's purple. There are people people who are red and there are people who are blue. And like crayons, you can make them look purple when you put them on top of each other. But that's not the way people are. There are different parts of Colorado that are different than the other parts. Anyway, thank you, Ron Mott, who's at Udall headquarters out there sorting it out. Let's bring in the former governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell. Governor, you were much more popular than the current governor, it seems. You got reelected rather well. This guy becomes the turkey of the year because he's the first governor in the history of Pennsylvania to use a word that Rachel just used, and I haven't heard tonight. She's used verbs like goose, and she's used the verb oust. I love that word. He was ousted.
When you oust a goose is when things get really, really hot. That doesn't happen until late at night.
Well, it's getting earlier. It's getting on here. But your thoughts about what he do wrong? It seems tough to lose a governorship watching it from the outside. How do you lose governorships?
Well, first of all, I want to correct you, Chris. William Penn served as governor for 37 years, and he never won a single election. But no, what Governor Corbett did wrong... That's right. What Governor Corbett did wrong was two things. One, he did cut $1 billion out of education in his first year when he didn't have to. He did it to give businesses almost $500 million in tax cuts at a time when nobody should have been getting tax cuts at that point because the economy was still in rocky shoals. Now, the second thing he did wrong was he did the Republican playbook. Cutting business taxes is going to produce jobs. My last month in office, Pennsylvania ranked, according to the U.S. Department of Labor statistics, 9th in the country in job creation. This month, we're 50th in the country, dead last in job creation. So it didn't work. It never works. You and Rachel know it doesn't work on the federal level. It doesn't work on the state level. So the economy was crushed. Education was tanked. Our kids' scores went through the floor. And what's worse is he actually did raise taxes because the local school districts, in a desperate attempt to make up for the loss of the money, had to raise their own property taxes. So he made those two basic mistakes, and he never recovered. He was dead in the water after his first year. He's not a bad guy. He actually came to his senses. He had signed a no-tax pledge. He violated that for transportation, for a good infrastructure bill, which I stood in the Capitol and endorsed, but it was too late to change.
Reverend Sharp is with me. Talk to the guy, what you raised the point earlier. Let's get a conversation out here.
I think, and the governor and I have talked about it. I'm talking about Governor Rendell, not former governor that was defeated tonight. And I think that the education cuts and the whole voter ID, voter suppression efforts that the Pennsylvania legislation put through that was championed by this government helped to bring out a turnout. And I think you predicted, Governor Rendell, he would lose and he lost. I think this is a big victory for the labor and civil rights community tonight.
Well, Reverend Sharpton's right, Chris and Rachel. To give you an example of how strongly those voter suppression efforts were felt, in the 46th Ward, which is West Philadelphia, a sort of lower middle class area of the city, almost 95% African American, the total vote in that ward was 5,028 to 133.
Nice. So people, so you get a sense from the community there that the people really rebelled against this effort to keep them out of the polling places.
No question. No question. It backfired. It backfired in the presidential year, and it still backfired in this year.
It's great to have you on, Governor Ed Rendell of Pennsylvania. Let's get back now to Steve Schmidt and Robert Gibbs.
Actually, before we go to you guys, we'll go to you guys in just a second, but I do think we have one more call to make. This is one of those interesting ballot initiatives that we've been watching. Maria Teresa was mentioning this before. This is personhood. This is the third time that Colorado voters have been asked to vote on a very radical anti-abortion measure. And for the third time, Colorado voters have said no to it by a very large margin. The personhood initiative in Colorado fails. At this point, 64 to 36%. That's with a little bit over half the vote in. It's too early to call for either the governor's race or the Senate race in Colorado, but personhood fails again. That's something that Cory Gardner has been sprinting from ever since he started running for statewide office. But Colorado
Rachel, would you explain that to me? Because personhood, if it's from the time of conception and 4 out of 5 fertilized eggs don't attach to the uterine wall, are they all people?
Yes.
All of them, even though they don't attach and never begin to become a person.
That's yes. And Bob Beaupre,
has anybody thought through the science of this?
Bob Beaupre, running for Colorado governor, wants to ban the IUD because he believes that the IUD as a form of contraception is an abortion because of that same argument.
Yeah, I know, but that's an argument they can make. But the person argument, it says you are a citizen. That fertilized egg that doesn't attach. And what happens to that citizenship?
The voters in Mississippi rejected this, the most conservative voters in the country.
What it says is 30 seconds after you had sex, you're two people.
Yeah, well, okay, but I just think they haven't thought through the science.
Honestly,
let's go to men now, and we'll move on.
We've got one. We've got one other. We've got one more of these. On another social issue, a very hotly contested social issue, on the issue of marijuana. Now, there's a bunch of states tonight that are voting on legalizing marijuana for recreational use. In Florida, the vote was on medical marijuana, and they needed a 60% yes vote in order to pass this because it would have amended the Florida state constitution. They did get a big yes vote for medical marijuana in Florida, but they did not hit the 60% threshold that they would need in order to amend the Constitution. And so Florida will not be getting medical marijuana. A lot of races still to come, a lot of governors' races in particular still to come tonight, including some of those states that are having those interesting ballot measures like Colorado and Florida. Let's go now to Steve Schmidt and Robert Gibbs on the governor's races, what we know so far and what seems to at least have been decisive.
Well, look, I think when you look at the governor's races right now, you have a subplot playing out tonight, and that's with the presidential aspirants. Chief among them, Chris Christie, chairman of the Republican Governors Association. So I think it's still too early to make any big sweeping judgments on the governor's races. I think the news in Florida is looking somewhat encouraging for Republicans. In Illinois, very vulnerable Democratic governor who's slightly ahead in the race right now. But as these governor's races flesh out over the next couple of hours, I think it remains to be seen how many Republican governors lose. And certainly that will be an indictment on Chris Christie if it's more than a couple.
Particularly in swing state governors, Colorado, Florida, Michigan, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Obviously, some of those we've called, but there are a lot of swing state governor races that are up. I think what will be interesting is to watch those Rust Belt Midwestern states that we still have to see, which are Scott Walker, Rick Snyder in Michigan. I think those are two that are going to be very interesting to watch. And as we look at Colorado, I mean, I think one thing that's got to be a little concerning with 62% or 63% of the vote in there is that the Senate candidate, Mark Udall, trails the Democratic governor. He's at a 48-48 race, whereas the Udall Gardner race is 51-44. Again, same precincts in, so a little concerning that you have that Senate candidate there trailing what the Democratic governors get.
Thanks, guys. We're back to you. When we come back right now in a moment, the polls will be closed in Iowa. What a hot state race that is for Senate there. And Montana, another one we expect the Republicans to win. But watch Iowa. Coming back in just a minute. Results right after this.